the scariest cults from around the world. Imagine you're standing on the street just minding your own business when you get approached by a couple and they have some important information for you. They tell you that they are spiritual guides and they can help take you to a next level of existence beyond Earth and human comprehension. They say that you can transcend humanity by transforming into an immortal extraterrestrial being. It sounds like an interesting proposal. So you take a flyer and attend a meeting, and at this point you can go either one of two ways. Your suspicions are either confirmed and you realize that you spoke to crazy people, or you believed you talked to some of the most important people ever, and in that instance, you just joined a cult. This cult is known as Heaven's Gate, and it was an American cult founded in 1974 by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, who, like I mentioned, saw themselves as spiritual guides to a next level of human existence. Without spoiling the ending, Heaven's Gate is most commonly known for its mass suicides committed by its members, but the story goes a lot deeper than just the headlines. Nettles and Applewhite first met in 1972 and went on a journey of spiritual discovery together, and came out on the other side identifying themselves as two witnesses of Revelation, or the Book of Apocalypse in the Bible. This claim alone, and some clever convincing, was reason enough for them to start attracting hundreds of people to start at least paying attention to their movement in the mid-70s. And after a few years, they even had over a dozen members adopting a monastic lifestyle, dedicating their life to Heaven's Gate and giving up all worldly pursuits beyond this cult, which is insane. This cult is commonly recognized as a UFO religion, primarily because the central belief of this group was that the followers could transform themselves into immortal extraterrestrial beings by rejecting their human nature. By rejecting this human nature, they would, by default, ascend to heaven, or what they would refer to as the next level. This cult primarily grew by Applewhite and Nettles trying to contact other extraterrestrials, aka like-minded people, aka other crazy people. They took out ads and flyers to promote meetings where they would recruit disciples that they called the Crew. At these events, they would purport to represent beings from another planet who were looking for patients for an experiment. That alone is already creepy. They got straight to the crazy even on sign up. There was no easing into it, it seemed. They mentioned, though, that those who agreed to take part in their experiment would be brought to a higher evolutionary level. An interesting proposal, potentially, but still, red flags are everywhere. In 1975, Applewhite and Nettles preached at a motel hall in Oregon, and following that session, over 20 people sold all of their worldly possessions and essentially disappeared off the face of the planet, not being seen by family, friends, or even the general public at all. These people didn't just disappear, but they had become a part of Heaven's Gate, which at this point had already began going underground. Applewhite and Nettles changed their name to Doe and T, and they had led nearly 100 people across the country to ditch their families and join Heaven's Gate. The lore that they came up with is deep, and it's a really weird twist on a lot of existing religious texts and theories about history. But one of the more interesting claims they made is that they believe that Jesus himself was an alien, which is an interesting take for sure. But what's more interesting is what happened in October of 1996. The group rented a large house that they called the Monastery, which was a 10,000 square foot mansion in California. At the time, they were paying $7,000 per month in rent, cash, and they even took out alien abduction insurance on each of their members, with a $1 million payout per person. Which, who the hell is selling alien abduction insurance? But that's a side point. That's a video about insurance scams, not cults. Now, this house isn't the interesting event, but it's the precursor to what really put this cult on the map. Nearly 1 year into renting the monastery, Applewhite taped a video of himself entitled Doe's Final Exit, where he spoke on mass death and how it was the only way to evacuate this Earth. He was convinced that the comet Hale-Bopp was the sign that the group had been looking for, and speculated that there was a UFO following this comet. And because of this, Applewhite and 38 of his followers prepared a ritual death. This death lined up exactly with when the comet was closest to the Earth, so that their souls could reach the next level. In the following days, 39 people had taken a concoction of vodka and poison, and, like you may have guessed, died. There is so much crazy and honestly disturbing lore to this cult, but I think the best way to describe it is that they believe that humans were boring, aliens were cool, and if a human wanted to become an alien, they had to die. It's amazing what people are willing to believe and dedicate and sacrifice their life for. Oh, and if the Heaven's Gate logo looks familiar, Lil Uzi Vert used it as inspiration for his album cover, which is odd. But assuming you're a semi-reasonable person, you're likely not interested or swayed by the claims of an afterlife and UFOs and being reading a part of the Bible from random strangers. What a reasonable person may be interested in, though, is a community that worships God, people that are like-minded in faith, a faith that at surface level seems semi-reasonable. In this instance, you may be interested in the Children of God. This name already may sound familiar, and that's because Nick Crowley, a great YouTuber, just made a video about some of the lore involved with this cult. Specifically, the TV programs this cult was producing, which was insane. It was essentially propaganda pieces for children. And spoiler alert, it was pretty disturbing. But we'll get to that. The Children of God lore is deep, and I'll do my best to summarize it as neatly as possible. The Children of God was founded by a creep named David Berg in 1968. It initially attracted young followers with the message of love, communal living, and devotion, which may sound innocent enough. But the group soon became infamous for its controversial beliefs and practices. Most of these controversial beliefs and practices started to be introduced once the cult was more established. Initially, some of their beliefs were more conservative and aligned with the Bible, although it seemed that the group's beliefs started to morph to fit Berg's personal desires, which we'll get into. For example, initially the group was rather conservative and didn't even believe in hand-holding until marriage. But once Berg had an affair with his assistant, he then started spreading messages of polygamy, which turned into what he called sharing, which we'll get into, and that gets a lot darker. Before we get too into the weeds, let's give some context. This group was founded with a core focus on an apocalyptic prophecy, where Berg was claiming that the world was set to end in 1993. And the purpose of this group was to promote love and devotion to God so that they could be saved during this apocalypse. They spread their messages through song and dedicated as much time as possible to praising God before the end times. Child members of this group were not even educated because they saw it as a waste of time because the world was ending soon anyway. So all of the children and adults in this group were simply sitting, hanging out, singing songs, waiting for the end of the world, which to me doesn't sound like a great time. But that's just me. Floor Edwards, a previous member of the Children of God, said this about the cult's mindset at the time. Quote, "For many it was euphoric thinking about the afterlife. We earned that spot in heaven. We were the chosen ones." That's definitely a take on it. Interestingly, Berg wasn't seen very often by most of the cult members, as at its peak, the group had over 10,000 members worldwide. Although he was in consistent communication with all of his followers through what he called Mo letters, which was essentially daily propaganda pieces, where he would take Bible verses and intertwine them with his own twisted doctrine, which, like I mentioned earlier, evolved over time. These Mo letters included instructions that his followers must follow, and strangely enough, a lot of the imagery in these letters was rather graphic. We'll say that. According to ex-members of the Children of God, Mo wrote over 3,000 of these Mo letters, which is insane. But these letters weren't the only way that the Children of God was able to get their message out. Like I mentioned, Nick Crowley made a great video about the TV series that the Children of God had created and that was televised called Life with Grandpa, in which he describes the TV show essentially indoctrinating children into the values of the group and the religious beliefs that were unsavory, to say the least. To really paint the picture, there's a scene in the show where a woman is shown as a robot with literal boobs, and Grandpa, aka David Berg, was talking about how much he loves this perfect woman. And there's many episodes with young girls singing about how their purpose is to cook, clean, and take care of the men in their life. That is honestly just a tame sampling of some of the cool stuff in this cult's kid show. Of course, I'm using cool ironically. Now, going back to the concept of sharing. Without getting too graphic, essentially, Berg was promoting love with no bounds, as he claimed that Jesus created love and sex for people to enjoy, and he thought the best way to honor God was to have it without limits, which to him meant with anybody at any time, consenting or not, which also included with children, which is obviously disgusting. Former members who were children at the time said that they felt pressured to do anything with anyone because they knew if they said no that they would be punished by God and potentially not accepted into heaven when the apocalypse came, which was, in their mind, soon. This, unsurprisingly, led to widespread allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse, of course, including minors. The Children of God faced significant backlash and legal scrutiny due to the reports of emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse among members, although that wasn't quite enough to take it down fully. That was the bump in the road for the group. After David Berg died, his assistant, who he was having the affairs with, took over the group and tried rebranding the group multiple times in an attempt to distance it from its dark past. And they even tried to renounce some of their harmful practices. However, the decades of trauma experienced by former members was an inseparable part of the cult's history. And with the death of David, the rebrands, and all of the allegations, the group went from over 10,000 members worldwide to today being a small underground internet community. And I personally personally hope it continues to shrink to the point of nothingness very soon. I'm sure the world not ending in 1993 also had a big part to do with it. Interestingly, multiple celebrities were actually involved with this cult, notably Joaquin Phoenix and Rose McGowan. Rose McGowan described her experience as extremely stressful, like she was walking a high-wire act. She was expected to be perfect physically, and was even cut with a knife by another member when she had a blemish on her finger. How Rose was involved in this group was because her father was actually the leader of the Italian branch of the Children of God. But fortunately, once the Children of God started promoting child abuse, her dad separated from the group entirely. Joaquin Phoenix and his siblings in the 1970s were also involved in the group, and even traveled through Central and South America with the group, but didn't remain members for long, as initially they thought it was a dedicated religious group, but found out that it was much deeper than that and cut ties. It's upsetting enough when individuals are tricked into joining cults and doing unspeakable things and having horrible lives, but it's just downright disheartening and depressing when they get their children involved too. Likely unsurprisingly, the Children of God had a extremely high suicide rate, with many ex-members having lifelong trauma, psychological illnesses, and at the very least, horrible, unforgettable memories. But if you're not interested in aliens, and you're not interested in any sort of religious movement, what if a man approached you and told you that he could tell you when you're going to die? This, to anybody, may seem like an interesting proposal, but the more info you start to get, the more the cracks start to show. This man referred to himself as Lou Castor and claimed that he was 1,000 years old and he was the combination of 3 different angels. He claimed that he had died and came back to life and that now he himself can predict deaths accurately, among other things. Potentially one of the biggest draws for some is that Lou claimed that if you were close to him, he could not only predict your death, but bring you back to life, which for most people sounds like a good reason to stick around. But on top of the claims of being resurrected, from a surface level, it looked like the members of this group lived a relatively lavish lifestyle. Lou had a compound in Wichita, Kansas, where he had 10 members of the group living with him. Everybody who was completely provided for with food, shelter, technology, toys, gadgets, ATVs, luxury vehicles, anything these members could want, they had, and it was all provided for by Lou. But interestingly enough, nobody knew what Lou did for work. He said he had stocks and bonds and a cattle ranch down in Texas, but nobody could directly pinpoint his wealth, and it didn't seem like anybody was extremely concerned because they were directly benefiting from it, although it definitely came with a price. Having a 10-person commune with luxury vehicles in Wichita, Kansas, definitely drew attention. But for this cult, that wasn't an issue. And Lou was an active participant in the community. He would donate to the police, have community-wide barbecues in his backyard, and even had an ATV track on his 10-acre property where anybody could come and enjoy the track. This sense of community definitely allowed people to feel a little bit more comfortable, and I think people assumed that if he had something to hide, he wouldn't be so flashy, which may seem reasonable, but you could also say this is more or less of a John Wayne Gacy approach. But here's the thing. Behind closed doors, unspeakable things were happening, and although on the surface it seemed like an outgoing, luxury lifestyle of cool people just having fun, it was really anything but that once you got to the core of the group. When Angel's Landing went from Texas to Wichita, Kansas, they actually gained 3 new members: Lou's real estate agent and 2 young daughters. This real estate agent sold Lou the property, and upon meeting him, she felt very compelled to not only be close to him, but protect him. And he shortly after confessed to her that he was an angel. Because of this information, this real estate agent uprooted herself and her 2 young daughters from Missouri to Wichita, Kansas to join the commune, leaving her husband and her children's father behind. I'm assuming you can guess where this is going, and it ended up with Lou assaulting and abusing both of these young girls. But not only that, combining it with mental manipulation to make them feel like it was almost normal, which it obviously wasn't at all. In 2003, the story got a lot more publicized, as one of the members living in the commune had passed away. This member had seemingly fallen, hit their head, and then fell into the pool, which caused them to drown and die, which obviously got a lot of attention but wasn't necessarily considered suspicious, at least not legally. The death aligned with most accidental drowning deaths and was not considered for having any foul play, although that didn't mean that there wasn't any questions stirring about this commune within the community. At this time, unbeknownst to Lou and the rest of the commune, the police were actually closely monitoring the commune, but not for the reasons you may have thought. They were being monitored by the narcotics department because Lou had unexplained wealth, and their assumption was that there was an illegal drug operation or something along those lines funding this 10-acre ranch with seemingly unlimited money. And with the news breaking of this death on the property, some members in the community had their own questions as well. This member that they lost was considered to be the mother of the group, and she was Lou's right-hand woman. And it was a tragic loss within the group and outside of the group, as she was somebody that people looked up to and at least had a positive relationship with publicly. Following the death of the member who passed away in the pool, The other members of the group were waiting for Lou to bring her back, as he claimed that this was an ability of his. And after some time passed, Lou changed his story and claimed that he doesn't want to bring Patricia back. Lou claimed that where Patricia is now is much better than where we are, and that our goal is to meet her where she's at and not to bring her back here. And I suppose that was a satisfactory response to some of the members. And although the death was ruled as accidental, the FBI was interested, to say the least. They began looking into a Lou Castro and realized that there is no record of this person existing. No documents, no birth certificate, no driver's license. They were dealing with a ghost, until they found one piece of information referencing the name. This was an obituary for a woman he used to live with in a previous smaller commune. This woman had passed away with her new boyfriend and daughter during a leisure flight, and unfortunately, shortly after takeoff, this entire group passed away. It's an interesting side note, but Lou was previously a plane mechanic. That, again, was ruled as an accidental death. But the coincidences are starting to kind of fall apart here. 3 years after the death of the woman in the pool, her husband, another member of Angel's Landing, was killed as well. He was working on his car and laying underneath a vehicle when his jack failed, crushing and killing him. The unfortunate and tragic death of this second member of Angel's Landing was a pivotal moment in discovering the truth. Like I mentioned, the Angel's Landing group was already under investigation secretly by the FBI and local authorities. But once 2 accidental deaths took place within 3 years, they cranked up their search and began looking at alternative means of information. And one thing they found that cracked this case wide open was the insurance payouts on these group members. Both Patricia, the woman who died in the pool, and her husband, who died under the car years later, had large life insurance policies, both of which specifically paying out to the Angel's Landing group, which was 100% controlled by Lou Castro. Each of these policies paid out over $1.2 million. And suddenly, things are starting to make a lot of sense. Somebody who's able to predict deaths and then have them magically happen, somebody who has accidental deaths magically follow him around, and somebody who has an unexplainable amount of wealth, but no source of income. All now starts to make a lot more sense when you realize that there may be some foul play going on here. But in case that's not enough to make you convinced that there was something really strange going on in this cult, 2 years after the husband of the initial woman who died passed away, there was a third death within the group. It was the death of the real estate agent who moved into the commune to protect him. This same woman that had 2 young daughters in the group. Lou got her 2 young daughters together and told them that it was her mother's time and that she was going to die shortly. Obviously, they were extremely upset and didn't want to believe it, and they told their mom. And their mom didn't seem too fazed and reassured them that she wasn't going anywhere and that she was going to be fine. But unfortunately, 2 days later, she passed away in a horrible car accident. And at that point, detectives were no longer allowing this to go on anymore. Once again, a life insurance payout was due to hit Lou's account any day. And coincidentally, the previous balance was getting pretty low from the last payout. It's almost like this was how he was funding his lifestyle. At this point, detectives were just going to his property and had a unique plan to collect fingerprints to try to get more information. They knocked on Lou's door and they told him that they were looking for information on local criminals and had pictures of criminals that they wanted him to potentially identify. The detectives entered his home and were starting to show him pictures, hoping to get fingerprints on the photographs, but they noticed that Lou was only grabbing these photos with his fingernails, meaning that he knew what was going on and that they were not going to get any fingerprints. Eventually, they were able to get him on charges of bank fraud, but realized that they needed to get him on these murders if they wanted him to serve any substantial time. And at this point, the stars almost aligned, because the eldest of the 2 young girls who were a part of this group at this point was an adult, and had met a man who shortly became her boyfriend. Not long into dating, they had a moment and she opened up to him about everything. And that night when she went to bed, he went to the FBI website and informed them about everything that was going on in this strange cult in Wichita. Surprisingly, they were quick to respond, collected her statement, and began a full-blown investigation on all of these claims. At this point, they were able to speak to the younger daughter as well, where they were able to collect all the information they needed to put this man away for a serious amount of time. During this Lou person's trial, it was revealed that his name isn't Lou at all, and that was only one of his many aliases, and that his name is Daniel Perez, and he has an extensive history of sexual abuse and much more. And the result of this trial happened in 2015, when Daniel Perez, aka Lou Castro, was sentenced with 80 years in prison. Unfortunately, all of the deaths involving Angel's Landing were still ruled accidental, but they did have a strong enough case through all of the other crimes to put him away for the rest of his life. Okay, I know this is a cult video and not a true crime video, but for Angel's Landing specifically, the beliefs were rather simple. And it wasn't even super religious, honestly. This mysterious, wealthy man just claimed that he was an angel and could predict deaths and save people near him if they did die. And he also required intimacy with children to maintain his powers. Although in reality, he was just a who was killing his own cult members for insurance payouts to fund his lifestyle. So the religious beliefs are simple, but the lore of the actual story is insane. And I thought you guys would appreciate this twisted story. I know we focused on a lot of mind-bending, twisted, pseudo-religious, disgusting beliefs, so I wanted to kind of focus on the reality of the life in these cults in this story. But the more research I did, the more invested I got in this story. And well, here we go. Before we get into the last cult of this video, I just want to say that it is the unfortunate reality that there is so many crazy and scary cults that have existed and still exist to this day. And although I hand-selected a few for this first video, I do have a sizable number of other cults I do want to discuss, although I didn't want to make this video extremely long in case it wasn't something you guys were interested in, because I haven't really discussed cults on the channel before. So if you guys are interested about more scary and truly disturbing cults, let me know in the comments or leave this video a like. This sort of engagement helps me understand what videos you guys actually want to see. But with that, let's get into our final cult, of this video at least. Let's say that you have absolutely no interest in any sort of religious group at all. Let's just say that you're interested in history, and let's say that maybe you found a particular interest with the Knights Templar, the Catholic military group tasked with protecting the Holy Grail. Perhaps that's an area of interest for you. Well, what if you were approached by some individuals who claimed to be the descendants of that military group and claimed to hold their ideals and then some? You may be interested in hearing them out. And what if these people claimed to you that not only were they the descendants of the Knights Templar, but one of the members was also the reincarnation of Moses from the Bible and King Tut's dad? At that point, you're likely gone, but let's say you're still a little interested. But here's the catch. Even if you're potentially interested in hearing them out, you have to be approved. Specifically through a sizable donation, as this cult is a pretty elitist group, with a group size at its peak of only around 300 to 400 members. So unless you were really wealthy, you weren't even able to hear them out, because they believed that only the richest were even worthy of hearing their message. This was the message of the Order of the Solar Temple, a Neo-Templar movement and a cult. This group had members in Canada, Switzerland, and France. One of the founders of this cult actually had a child with another cult member and believed that this child was a perfect child and that it was a higher being, and that any children that were to happen within the cult would be higher beings as well too, to help his daughter on her purpose. The cult grew and grew, and over time there was a lot of mismanagement happening between the two founders who didn't speak much about the direction of the cult. One leader was focusing on the inner workings of the cult, specifically the meditations, ceremonies, and day-to-day management, and the other leader was focused on the recruitment process, essentially running seminars and spreading the message of their special little group. Because this cult required very significant financial backing, members started to become uneasy on where their money was going, as the cult seemed to have not been growing as much as it once was. And this perfect higher level baby was now a teenager, and she was starting to rebel against her own father as well. And in 1991, one of the ex-members actually sued the group, which definitely started to show the writing on the wall for this elitist cult. And the next year, in 1992, one of the cult leaders was actually arrested for trying to buy illegal firearms in Canada, which is some unfortunate foreshadowing for what's about to happen. Later that year, people were becoming more and more restless, as not only were they unsure about where their money was going, but at this point there were so many unfulfilled spiritual promises that people were starting to not believe any of the claims of these cult leaders. This is where things get dark. As the cult was beginning to crumble and they were losing members and backing, they felt that they needed to figure out something quick, and they decided that they needed to have a transition within their movement. This was a transition to another world. At this point, they began to prepare themselves and certain high-ranking people within the Solar Temple that they believed would be highly favored in this new world, aka people that they probably thought they could manipulate. While they were prepping their members about how to transition into this new world, they were also planning how they would get revenge for those who they felt betrayed them, aka people who saw through the lies and left. The spree of this cult's revenge, starting with highly ranking cult members showing up at the door of previous cult members and stabbing their 5-month-old baby in the heart, as the leader of the Solar Temple claimed that this baby was the Antichrist, when in reality, the parents of this baby, who were also murdered in this horrific event, were simply people who didn't listen to the Solar Temple's demands, which were that they didn't get married and didn't have this baby because it wasn't what the higher beings wanted. It was essentially a power struggle that these former members were no longer interested in playing into. After this horrific murder, there was other instances of strange murder suicides until one of the most insane events associated with this cult happened. On the 5th of October in 1994, 23 people were found dead in a burning chalet in Switzerland. Their bodies were arranged in a circle, and they were all wearing ceremonial robes. After this mass death event, which was more murder than suicide, suicide, as most of the participants in this group didn't realize that they were going to be killed and left in a building that would be set on fire. Regardless, in total, 74 people died over the course of the multiple murders and mass murder suicides that happened because of the Order of the Solar Temple. And it's not even known how many of these deaths were suicides and how many of these deaths were murders. Because the founders of this cult were killed in these rituals and any of the remaining members went into hiding, the authorities were stumped at what to do because there was nobody to charge and not much that they could do, as most of the participants were gone as well. The result was an extremely strengthened anti-cult movement in Europe, specifically in Francophone Europe. As this event was extremely publicized, the word was finally out about the danger that can be caused by cults. I suppose the one true silver lining about cults is the fact that they always seem to be self-imploding, although even a few moments of existence for the cults that I mentioned today are longer than they should have ever existed. None of these people needed to be hurt, psychologically damaged, abused, assaulted, or killed. And if anything, I hope this video shines a small light on the terrifying world of cults, manipulation, and abuse that's possible. The ultra strange hobbies of the ultra rich. I think it's become obvious now more than ever that some rich people have really strange hobbies, and in some cases, they're downright evil. So in this video, I wanted to highlight a few of the most interesting cases where rich people are just doing absolutely weird stuff. The entries on this list range from wholesome to interesting to diabolical. It's kind of a mixed bag, so buckle up. And in case you're new, this video will get darker as the video goes on. Jeff Bezos. You may know him as the CEO and entrepreneur born in 1964. I know I made that joke in the last video, but it's still funny. What puts him on today's list? Well, two reasons actually. One, that's kind of wholesome and funny. The other, that's kind of strange, but in my opinion, kind of cool. At a conference in 2017, Amazon CEO Jeffrey Bezos admitted that he used to eat an entire pack of Pillsbury biscuits for breakfast every morning, with butter, of course. Supposedly, this biscuit-eating bandit had a bit of a problem, and borderline an addiction to eating these fluffy little pastries. He also mentioned that his wife made him quit and encouraged him to do so by simply reading the label, which he says, and I quote, "Honestly, that wasn't even a concept for me," which I guess just goes to show, when you're on that grind, you will eat anything. I'll throw the ingredients on screen for you to check out. If you're into nutrition, you'll get a good laugh out of these ingredients. One thing I do want to point out is the sheer amount of calories in these biscuits. Each individual biscuit has 170 calories, and each container has 8 biscuits, meaning that for breakfast alone, Bezos was eating over 1,300 calories, not including the butter, and that was just one meal. And of course, it was primarily consisting of carbs and salt. He did eventually clean up his act though, because this is his before and after. There was a lot of other things at play here, but I mean, at least one of the differences was he wasn't eating a can of biscuits every morning. If you're watching this thinking, that's not weird, I do that every morning, well, at least you have something in common with a billionaire, I guess. But another interesting and rather strange project that he's committed to is also his Millennium Clock. Bezos has invested $42 million into a clock that ticks once a year that is set to keep time for the next 10,000 years. The clock advances every 100 years, and the cuckoo part of this literally cuckoo clock will come out in 10,000 years. This clock is located in a mountain on Bezos' property in Texas. And personally, as a watch nerd, I find this kind of cool. But spending $42 million on a clock in the ground is kind of hilarious, and in my opinion, a bit strange. This next name on the list is a name I'm sure you've heard a lot recently, and I'm honestly kind of surprised how early they are in the list. But out of all of his interesting hobbies I'm sure that exist, this one I found the most interesting. I'm talking about Donald Trump and his obsession with golf. It's no surprise that old men love golf. It's no surprise that old rich men love golf. So it's no surprise that Donald Trump is a huge golf fan, especially considering he owns multiple golf courses. You may be asking, where's the strange hobby? Well, you may or may not know, Trump was previously the president. And during his time in office, he played an estimated 261 rounds of golf, which is essentially one full round every 5.5 days. This is either going to strike you as not a surprise or very surprising. And to me, I found this to be a very interesting statistic, mainly because I'm under the impression that being the president is a very important and very busy job, including travel, meetings, press, and much more. So the fact that this guy was able to fit in 18 holes of golf every 5.5 days on average is pretty insane. And if that's not weird enough for you, just look at his drive. It works and it's better than mine, but it definitely looks a little goofy. And in case that isn't strange enough for you, this man has been reported to drink 12 cans of Diet Coke a day, which to some of you may seem insane and to others may seem relatable. Regardless of how you feel, these are only tame examples and we're about to get into some weirder ones. Let's turn this up a notch. Mark Zuckerberg. Did you know that Mark Zuckerberg kills animals with his bare hands? Hopefully not, because that's not fully true. But he does have a slaughterhouse where he is obsessed with getting cows drunk. I'm not kidding. He opened up a beef farm in Hawaii to produce the highest quality beef known to man. And according to him, the best way to do this is by feeding them macadamia nuts and beer. I don't know anything about raising beef and I don't even eat meat, but I think there is something interesting about giving farm animals alcohol. These are either the happiest cows on the planet or simply living the life of a divorced dad. Regardless, I'm moving on because this next one is wild. Steve Jobs. To really set the scene for this next hobby or habit, I want you to close your eyes and visualize. You're in your massive office overlooking the city. You just got off a meeting and you just lost a major deal. You're upset, you're stressed out, and you're looking for a way to calm down before getting back to work and winning the next deal. If you were Steve Jobs, your next move would be to go into the bathroom, take off your shoes, and dip your feet into the toilet to simply relax. I know I like to say a lot of funny things, but this is a rumor that is really well known and considered to be true. When I first heard it, I didn't believe it either, and it was also one of the inspirations for this entire video. But this claim of Steve Jobs bathing his feet in the toilet water of the Apple restrooms to de-stress is an authorized account in the biography of Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Steve Jobs was an innovator. He was a shrewd negotiator. He was reportedly not very nice in the office setting, and supposedly he enjoyed a bit of toilet water to calm his nerves. Maybe that's why he was so wound up all the time, because if my only way of decompressing and de-stressing was dipping my feet in the toilet, I think I'd be pretty upset too. And for Jobs' sake, I really hope that he at least checked to make sure that the previous Apple employee didn't leave him a special surprise. That is disgusting, but I'm leaving it in. Taylor Swift. Some people love to fly. Some people are scared to fly. And some people fly to get lunch. I'll be honest, excessive flying is something that everybody on this list is very likely guilty of. I haven't confirmed, so I won't say is, but very likely. To make this video fun and entertaining, I'm gonna pin it on one person who's kind of a meme for it. Taylor Swift. In 2023 alone, Taylor Swift took over 170 flights. And within that year, over those 170 flights, across Swift's 2 private jets, she flew a total of 178,000 miles, which is equivalent to flying around the entire globe 7 times. Which, when you put it that way, honestly doesn't sound that much, but the number of flights and sheer miles is pretty crazy. On top of this, she caught a lot of backlash when she took a 13-minute flight from one part of St. Louis to the other. Literally 13 minutes. And assuming there was only mild traffic, driving the same route would have only been about 30 minutes, saving a total of 17 minutes by flying. I get why flying is popular. When you're busy and important and have stuff to do, it makes a lot more sense to fly places than take alternative means. But it's just crazy to see how far this will go and how often people will fly and how short of flights people are willing to take. At this point, I'm convinced if Taylor could take a flight to cross the road, she probably would. I'll admit, this example isn't really that crazy at all. It's pretty common, but I feel like we needed a bit of a palate cleanse after Mr. Jobs' toilet fiasco. And while we're on the topic of live performers, I have something that you're either gonna find really cool or really odd. Jack Ma. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, the Chinese e-commerce behemoth, is actually a dedicated live performer and a Michael Jackson impersonator. It is well documented that at the annual Alibaba parties, Jack Ma will not only dress up as Michael Jackson, but also perform as Michael Jackson on stage for the entire company. He's only impersonated Michael Jackson once, to my knowledge, but he has consistently performed for the company every time with passion. It's cool to see. Imagine you just worked for this random company. Like, imagine if you worked for Amazon, you worked in the warehouse, and then there was like this Amazon Christmas party. You're like, okay, I'll go. And then you go there, and then Bezos is on stage pretending to be Drake. Maybe not Drake, and then Bezos is on stage just doing an Elvis impression. Honestly, I respect the hustle. And this just goes to show, no matter how old you are or how much money you have, rock stars are always cool. And while we're talking about rock stars, let's discuss somebody who was, at least for a while, married to one and probably thinks they are one too. I'm talking about Elon Musk. And why is he so high up on this list? What exactly did he do that was so diabolical? What is his sinister hobby? Well, that should be obvious. He is a goth girl enthusiast. I know, illegal in most states and a crime that is in most cases unrecoverable. But when you're the richest man in the world, you can survive the goth girlfriend experience, something not many of us are able to do. On a serious note, Musk is also on the forefront of billionaires that are now astronauts and literal space agencies. Musk obviously has SpaceX, but he's not alone in his space endeavor. Richard Branson, who has Virgin Galactic, and Jeff Bezos, who has Blue Origin, are keeping Musk company in the billionaire spaceman category. And yeah, there's others, but these are the main ones, for sure. I totally forgot to mention this earlier too, but Bezos is literally like that space cowboy meme from Family Guy. Like, look at this picture from Family Guy and then look at Bezos. Like, dude, the cowboy hat in the spacesuit is honestly iconic. And totally laughable too. As strange as Musk's obsession is with occupying Mars, his company SpaceX is honestly doing a lot of good. And currently, at the time of making this video, they're the reason why astronauts are able to come home. Due to Boeing's latest failure, astronauts have been stranded on the International Space Station way longer than anticipated. And if SpaceX wasn't in the picture, these stranded astronauts would have to wait a lot longer than they currently are. Love these guys or hate these guys, I think that having a focus on space travel is important and noble. You can definitely argue that attention can be put elsewhere, and you're not wrong, but I don't think that nullifies the importance of this as well. He also basically views having kids as a hobby and likes living in a tiny box, so yeah, goth girls will do it to you, man. It's also been reported that he just skips breakfast and eats a Mars bar, which I definitely think is a metaphor, but also goes to show that this dude literally lives like a child. If I just explained his habits, you'd probably assume he was a child. Like, think about it. If I said, hey, I'm gonna introduce you to somebody who eats candy for breakfast, likes living in a small box, likes to jump up and down, and laughs like a maniac, you'd probably assume I was about to introduce you to a toddler. But nope, he's actually the richest man in the entire world. For our next few entries, I'm gonna be easing us into some less funny and more serious topics. I'll start this transition with Bill Gates, someone who's done a lot of good things and a lot of questionable things too. Something he's really known for is his computer skills. Something that he's not necessarily known for is his use of his computer skills back in his school days. Bill Gates is reported to have actually hacked and tweaked the code on his computer's scheduling program to put him in all girls classes to increase his chances of getting dates. View this how you want, but it's definitely odd at the very least. And manipulative wouldn't be an unfair word to use. He likely resorted to this because his other methods of swooning girls probably didn't work that well. For the longest time, his party trick that he did on national television quite often was just jumping over office chairs, which is kind of cool, especially for somebody of his physique and, I guess, career path. But it's definitely not that cool where it's worth doing every opportunity you get. Cool gimmick, but I don't know if it was getting him all the ladies he wanted. I think he was better off sticking to dancing. Just look at him busted down at Best Buy. That's totally not somebody who looks kind of like him. That's definitely him. And with that, we're on to our final entry. And I know this video has been really fun and light up until this point with a lot of jokes, but this last entry is no laughing matter. You saw the thumbnail, and I'm sure most of you were waiting for it. Our last entry is Sean Combs, also known as P. Diddy. Without going into detail, because I honestly don't think it's in good taste to go into details on such a serious case in a video that I've kept pretty lighthearted, but I did think it was worth mentioning the sheer depravity of this specific individual and also others in his position. In recent news, there has been a lot of famous examples of rich and powerful people taking advantage of people and doing unspeakable things. And I wish that this is something that was unheard of, but unfortunately it's not. And although I can't begin to wrap my head around why somebody would ever want to do this to people, it is theorized that these people crave power. They crave control. The egomaniac tendencies that has allowed them to create success is also the same mindset that is allowing them to justify hurting and abusing people, which is disgusting. This isn't something that's exclusive to billionaires or rich people, but when this sort of despicable behavior is participated in amongst the elites, it's definitely at a different level where it can go on for much longer, affect more people, and be hidden much better, and fought much better in court. I could easily joke about the 1,000 bottles of baby oil and the freak-offs talked about in this case, but I think the situation is much more serious than that. And if you're looking for information on it, honestly, this isn't the video for it, but it was definitely worth mentioning, especially with how current it is. Do I just believe that everybody who's rich and is a billionaire or is ultra wealthy instantly evil? I don't. I honestly don't. What I do believe, though, is that money allows people access in resources like nothing else. And if you are an evil or depraved or degenerate person, this money will allow you to fulfill your darkest fantasies. And as we saw on this list, it's not extremely unheard of, but there is still so much good in this world, and there are so many people that do good with their money and have earned their money doing good things. Terrifying mental disorders you've never heard of. Cotard syndrome. During the late 1880s, French neurologist Jules Cotard had a very peculiar experience with one of his patients. Her name was Mademoiselle X, and she came to the neurologist claiming that she didn't need to eat anymore. She said this because she believed that she was dead. For some reason, this patient was fully convinced that she had no stomach, no chest, no blood, and no brain. And she knew for a fact that she simply wasn't alive and was not able to die. She told Cotard that she must have been condemned to eternal damnation, and for that reason she cannot possibly die a natural death. As if she could have, she would have died already, as her organs were rotting and she didn't have any blood. And because this patient believed that she had no internal organs, she simply stopped eating as there was no need to, and unsurprisingly, she later died of starvation. This interaction that Jules Cotard had experienced with this patient definitely left an imprint on him and forced him to document everything that this patient was saying and every symptom that they were having. Through this study, he coined the term Cotard syndrome and described the condition as the delusion of negation, stating that it was a psychiatric syndrome that varied in severity. He claimed that mild cases were characterized by despair and self-loathing, while severe cases were characterized by intense delusions of negation and chronic psychiatric depression. Now, although this sounds like an odd one-off story that happened almost 200 years ago, that's not at all the case, and this syndrome still exists today. And while it is extremely rare, there are still people suffering from this syndrome around the world. Cotard syndrome is also known as the walking corpse syndrome. The main symptom of having Cotard syndrome is having a strong belief that you are dead. Many people with this condition simply believe that their internal organs are rotting, or that those organs are missing altogether and they are just existing but not alive. A statistical analysis of people suffering from this study showed that 55% of patients with Cotard syndrome believed that they were immortal due to this condition, while the other 45% denied their own existence, claiming that they did not exist, which is definitely a hard sell when you're the one explaining you don't exist. Cotard syndrome is relatively simple to understand, but I'm sure for its patients it's an extremely terrifying experience. Just imagine being fully convinced that you're either missing organs or having organs that are rotting away, or just simply believing that you are somehow dead. It's almost mind-bending trying to even comprehend the mindset in the first place. So I couldn't even imagine how confusing it is to be experiencing that as a reality. Most of the people experiencing these delusions typically end up neglecting their personal care, refusing to eat, clean themselves, sleep, use the washroom, and also may experience self-harming behaviors, all because that they believe there is no reason to maintain a body that they literally consider to be lifeless. To this day, very little is known about this syndrome, but it is still associated with severe depression, schizophrenia, and other neurological issues such as brain lesions. Cotard syndrome is a very peculiar mental condition, but for this list, it's only the tip of the iceberg, and we're just getting into some of the most terrifying and rare mental conditions. Koro. I want you to be honest. Have you ever looked down and thought, dang, my little bro must be shrinking. It was never this small. Well, in that case, you might be suffering from Koro. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin with it. It's also known as genital retraction syndrome or shrinking penis disease, both of which definitely give an odd foundation, and both of which are actually not even fully accurate. And while Koro is a syndrome that does occur worldwide, it is considered a cultural bound delusion, essentially meaning that the symptoms of this delusion are only recognized in specific societies and cultures. Patients suffering with Koro experience overwhelming and intense beliefs that their sexual organs are retracting, and while this literally isn't happening, these people suffering from this disease will go to extreme lengths to prevent this shrinkage from happening. Most people suffering from this condition typically begin by reporting anxiety attacks due to their perceived lack of genitalia, and this perceived shrinkage will be a huge cause of stress for the individual suffering from Koro. And if you're a woman, don't think you're safe from Koro, because there are women who experience Koro, but obviously they aren't experiencing their penis shrinking. They believe that their nipples are retracting and that their breasts are also retracting into their bodies, slowly shrinking. There are cases in which patients experiencing Koro symptoms will have these symptoms for years, and at that point it will be considered chronic. And to doctors, that is an indication of a potential comorbidity with body dysmorphic disorder, also known as BDD. Interestingly, a lot of people experiencing Koro also experience an intense anxiety or fear of impending death, essentially meaning that these people believe that their genitals will shrink so small that they are literally going to die. And this specific belief has a strong cultural link to traditional Chinese beliefs. This sounds kind of silly and obviously odd, but the delusions that these patients are experiencing are nothing funny and truly terrifying. This delusion can cause extreme anxiety, panic, compulsive behaviors, and even habits such as genital stretching to prevent this perceived shrinkage or retraction. The cause for this delusion isn't fully clear, but it is believed to be primarily fueled by cultural beliefs and stress. Now, like I mentioned, if you are experiencing Koro, you aren't actually experiencing any sort of shrinkage of any of your body parts. But what's interesting is that there is a bit of a devious feedback loop that you are getting. Typically, when people are experiencing a Koro attack, they will experience vasoconstriction, which will actually cause their genitals to temporarily shrink a little bit. This actually affirms their delusion and causes a very vicious cycle until the delusion is so strong that it is simply a core belief. And while this vasoconstriction is only temporary, when you are believing such a odd delusion, you are not necessarily thinking logically about this. And even when presented with the fact, it is still hard to come to the conclusion that you are not shrinking. Depending on what culture you're a part of when you are experiencing this Koro, the treatments may differ. In traditional Chinese medicine, typically the remedy that is recommended is a herbal tincture that is applied to your genitals. While in some African cultures, people experiencing Koro will be prescribed a weight to attach to their genitals to help stretch it, to of course maintain its size. Neither of these remedies sound particularly pleasant, and this entire affliction, while silly seeming, is definitely rare. It is a bit unfortunate that your body is almost unwillingly feeding into your delusion by shrinking your junk during these times of panic, unintentionally feeding your delusion more and more. However, typically instances of Koro are not lifelong. Although we may be able to get a chuckle out of it, it's definitely something I would never want to experience. So yeah, Koro literally has men believing that their penis is shrinking and it's gonna get so small that they are literally going to die. And it's still only the second entry on this list. Let's keep going. Body integrity identity disorder. Body integrity identity disorder, also known as BIID, is a condition that I felt made a lot of sense to put here because it kind of relates to the last one, although it's not fully the same. People who are experiencing Koro disorder believe that one of their appendages is shrinking and they are trying to maintain it, whereas people with BIID experience essentially a disassociation from one of their limbs. What this means is that people experiencing this condition essentially don't want either part or one or multiple of their limbs because to them it just doesn't feel like it's theirs. To try to understand how these people are feeling, people with BIID have described it as imagining that you are growing a new limb. That would feel unnatural and you obviously wouldn't want that there. That's how people with BIID feel about their natural born limbs. And people experiencing this condition typically go to extreme lengths to essentially feel normal, typically by seeking amputation for the perfectly healthy limb. Some patients with severe cases of this disorder even wish and desire to become paraplegic. This condition is extremely rare and also uncommonly studied, meaning that there is not much known about it, besides the fact that it blurs the lines between psychiatry and neurology. And for most people suffering from BIID, treatment specifically focuses on understanding the underlying cause for this deep desire. And like I mentioned, for some, does result in amputation. Imagine how you would feel if you felt like there was a part of your body that simply was alien to you, and with nobody to relate to or to be able to give you any sort of answers, it must be a lonely and heartbreaking experience. One thing that came to mind when researching this specific disorder was that one episode of Dr. Phil when that lady poured, I believe it was like drain cleaner in her eyes to make herself permanently blind because she just wanted to be blind. I'm not sure if she was suffering specifically from BIID, but it definitely seems like she was suffering similar symptoms and obviously didn't feel like she was supposed to have the ability to see. But speaking of these limbs feeling alien, let's discuss the next mental disorder. Alien hand syndrome. Alien hand syndrome varies pretty drastically from BIID in one major way. People experiencing alien hand syndrome don't feel like their hand isn't supposed to be part of their body. Their hand simply doesn't act in accordance to their will, almost as if their hand was a sentient being or acting on its own will or potentially an alien limb to your body. Patients experiencing alien hand syndrome typically experience symptoms in their left hand, and what this hand does typically varies depending on the severity of the situation. In 1908, when alien hand syndrome was first discovered, a 57-year-old woman was actually attacked by her alien hand, with this hand consistently smacking and trying to choke the woman, and she had to fight for her life to prevent her rogue limb from killing her. And while this example is extreme and obviously terrifying, it's not the norm, although it isn't uncommon for this rogue limb to do things that you likely wouldn't want them to. like undressing yourself in public, or simply spilling food or drink, or simply dropping things for no apparent reason. Interestingly, while the first case was reported in 1908, the number of cases actually increased in the 1940s onward when a specific surgery for epilepsy began to become more popular. The specific epilepsy surgery that was correlated with alien hand syndrome was a surgery that essentially disconnected both sides of the brain, cutting the corpus callosum down the center of the brain. The corpus callosum is essentially a bridge of nerves that connects the left brain to the right brain. And disconnecting them, although effective for epilepsy, had consequences. And while that specific epilepsy treatment isn't the only cause for alien hand syndrome, it was definitely one of the most prominent initially. However, with more recent research, it has been discovered that people with medial frontal cortex or parietal lobe damage can also suffer from an alien hand. Although, depending on the area of your brain that was damaged, you will get a different type of alien hand syndrome, which is interesting and also pretty scary. Which I suppose makes sense, but definitely doesn't make it any less scary. People who had their medial frontal cortex damaged typically experience their alien hand being mischievous, with the most common symptoms being impulsive groping and the reluctance to let go of anything. With damage to your corpus callosum, typically you experience your hands literally fighting each other, which I can only imagine is a very unpleasant and scary experience. Now, somewhat differently, people with damage to their parietal lobe experience this condition a bit differently, as they not only don't have control over this arm and have it kind of do whatever it wants, they also feel estranged from this limb. Similar, but not to the same extent that people with BIID experience. But just imagine that. Not only do you feel like this limb that is on your natural body doesn't belong to you, but also not even being able to control it. It simply is there, part of you, but it kind of has a mind of its own. That is undeniably terrifying. Currently, the direct cause for why this happens in the brain is unknown, and unfortunately, there isn't a cure either. One of the most popular treatments is pretty simple and basically just involves making your alien hand hold on to an object consistently to give it something to do, essentially. I think being born with this condition, you could likely learn to adapt to it relatively quickly and it could be part of normal life, but I think one of the most terrifying parts about this disease is that it's typically developed later in life, meaning that you can live a totally normal life having control of both of your arms. And by getting brain damage in one way or another, not only can you lose control of one of your limbs, but you can literally lose control of one of your limbs. Like, this limb isn't just paralyzed. It is doing things without your consent. It has a mind of its own. And depending on the severity of what this hand is doing, you may have a violent appendage attached to your body with its sights aimed at you. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Alice in Wonderland syndrome is a neurological disorder that distorts your perception. Typically, this distortion is experienced visually, and these visual distortions are perceived by objects either appearing larger than they are, or smaller than they are, or closer than they are, or potentially even farther than they are. And as you may be able to assume, this is extremely debilitating. These are only a few of the over 60 symptoms associated with Alice in Wonderland syndrome. The Alice in Wonderland books and movies are interesting and fun and whimsical, but when that sort of psychedelic experience is your consistent reality, it becomes a lot less appealing. And for patients suffering with this condition, they can experience not only visual, but also auditory, touch, and time perception issues. It's important to note that these aren't necessarily hallucinations. They're simply a misinterpretation of real things that are happening for a reason that is not fully understood. All that is known about Alice in Wonderland syndrome is that it's currently associated with migraines, head trauma, and EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. In most cases, patients don't experience symptoms consistently, but rather in series of attacks where suddenly almost everything in their reality changes. Just imagine you're sitting on the couch watching TV when all of a sudden the TV that you're looking at becomes 5 times bigger and the room that you're in becomes 10 times smaller, and all of a sudden all you hear is ringing and people talking, and it feels like time's moving really slow and then really fast, and everything's consistently changing and you have almost no ground, no basis of reality, and you can't trust what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, or touching, and all you can simply do is wait it out. But this wait itself can seem endless with the perception of time being so distorted. However, as disorienting and terrifying as this experience may sound, this disease is pretty understudied and currently isn't considered a neurological disorder or a psychiatric illness, and is kind of just in this medical gray area. And currently there isn't even a known number of how many people are experiencing this mental condition to begin with. A reason for why it's low priority to be researched is because it's not considered to be dangerous, which I suppose is a nice benefit. However, 15% of people that do experience this condition then have their attack almost instantly followed up with a migraine, which definitely adds insult to injury. And in that case, there is at least pain associated with this disorienting experience. This condition has been seen in both adults and children, but is most commonly seen in children. And while its cause is unknown, during studies of people who have been actively having these attacks, there is abnormal amounts of electrical activity taking place inside the patient's brain, resulting in an abnormal amount of blood flow to certain parts of the brain that process visual perception and texture. Regardless, even with the lack of classification and little known information about this disease, to me, the experience of Alice in Wonderland syndrome does sound terrifying and extremely unfortunate for those who suffer essentially in silence with almost no answers. It almost sounds like a random bad trip that you don't consent to and can happen at almost any time. Something I wouldn't wish on anybody. But we do still have one more entry to discuss. And quickly, before we get to this final entry on the list, I did want to mention, there was at least another 10 or 15 entries that I researched and wanted to put in this video that I simply had to cut for time, because we post videos every Friday. So with that, if you guys liked this video about rare and terrifying mental disorders, please let me know if you guys would like a part 2. I've got plenty more to talk about, and I'd also love to hear if you guys have any recommendations in the comments below. That being said, let's get to the final entry on this list. Capgras delusion. There's no doubt that every entry on this list in one way or another has been upsetting, disheartening, terrifying, and of course, obscure. But I saved this entry for last because I believe it to be one of likely the most upsetting and depressing entries on this list. But the belief that patients suffering from this delusion believe is extremely disheartening. Those suffering from Capgras delusion believe that someone close to them, typically a loved one, has been replaced by an identical imposter. And in some cases, they even believe that this imposter is going to do them harm. Unsurprisingly, Capgras delusions are typically associated with people experiencing paranoid schizophrenia, but these delusions are also present in people with dementia, brain tumors, and brain injuries. How this works is when you see another human's face, your eyes send a signal to the occipital cortex in your brain, and from there, that signal is sent to the fusiform part of the brain. This part of the brain is specifically responsible for facial recognition, which allows you to not only recognize people, but also tell people apart. The fusiform part of the brain then sends a signal to the amygdala, and based on the signal that the amygdala gets, it will release specific chemicals depending on how you perceive this person. These chemicals are essentially the precursor to emotions and help your brain understand how you love and how you care about someone and who you love and who you care about. Now, for people with Capgras delusion, their brain varies because the fusiform part of their brain is not sending a strong enough signal to the amygdala, essentially meaning you can recognize somebody's face, but you're not getting the chemical reaction allowing you to essentially feel the emotions you're supposed to feel when seeing and thinking about that person. That lack of chemical release makes this person seem foreign or alien or like something is missing, which is where the delusion comes into play, that this person must not be the real person that I know and love. This must be an imposter. This must be a clone. This must be a fake. And that is essentially how we understand how this delusion comes to be. And while we may understand how it happens, it doesn't make it any less terrifying or upsetting. If any of you watching this have experienced a family member with Alzheimer's, then you kind of know what I'm talking about. How upsetting and how scary it is to see somebody that you've known all of your life simply not remember you anymore, or to even not like you anymore. Growing up, one of my grandmothers actually had Alzheimer's, and during the later stages of it, she not only forgot who my sister was, who was living with her at the time, she also began to resent my sister for seemingly no reason. I can't imagine how that would feel to have not only your grandmother forget you, but begin to hate you and openly cuss you out and disrespect you. Of course, you have to understand that that's not them, that that's the disease, but it still hurts, and it's disheartening to see the deterioration of a loved one. Obviously, Alzheimer's and schizophrenia as well are terrifying and upsetting diseases, but this video is specifically focused on unheard of and obscure diseases, which is why I didn't outright mention them. Focusing back on Capgras delusion, not only do people suffering from this believe that someone that they love or know may be replaced by some sort of clone, but depending on the severity of their condition, what they do about this belief could range drastically. For example, the person experiencing this delusion may refuse to talk to that person altogether, as they do not believe that that's actually their loved one. In other cases, the person experiencing these delusions may actually physically assault or attack these people as they believe that they have done something negative with their loved one and replaced them, and they want to find answers. And in most cases, people refuse to believe any evidence to prove that they are not an imposter. And some people even become obsessed obsessed with exposing this imposter, going to almost any lengths to expose the true reality, which is obviously just a delusion. It's for this reason that I wanted to save this condition for the end of the list, because I believe on this list it's definitely the most terrifying and upsetting. And as of right now, there is little known, no cure, and not even treatment available for this delusion. Mental health is no joke, and in this video we discussed some truly terrifying and obscure mental health conditions. And I hope that more research will be conducted to help treat people with these conditions. In this video, I want to discuss some of the weirdest, scariest, and strangest yokai in Japanese folklore. Up until this point, I really didn't know too much about them, and after reading a few comments, I knew I had to dig deeper. Initially, I just thought yokai was a type of Japanese creature, or just one sort of folklore monster, but I was quite wrong, and the lore goes much deeper. Yokai is essentially just a blanket term for anything supernatural in the world of Japanese folklore, and the word itself is comprised of two kanji characters that both mean suspicious or doubtful. So if you think about it, yokais are just sus. I've been doing a ton of research, and this is just my small list of some of my favorites. And like every list we do, we start tame and get more intense. Starting off pretty tame, we have Nuri Botoke. He is kind of a chill dude. He's really just a prankster. His appearance is definitely the creepiest or strangest part about him. He is essentially a flabby, overweight, Buddha-looking creature with oily black skin, a very horrible stench, and probably the scariest part, his eyes are dangling out of the sockets. They are also known as altar yokai or shrine ghosts. This is because they appear when family shrines are left open overnight, allowing them to crawl into the room from the other world. When this imp-like creature appears in the home, they don't do anything violent, but their job is to more or less annoy the inhabitants of the house. They are known to stomp around and flap their tails and be rather annoying. Some say just for fun they even give humans false prophecies just to try to trick them. Although he may look scary and he may be rather annoying, they disappear on their own when daytime comes and can be easily avoided by keeping the shrine closed or by sprinkling a little bit of salt on the floor. Nuri Botoke is definitely one of the most forgiving mythical creatures, or specifically yokai, we've ever touched on the channel. He is realistically just a reminder to keep your shrines closed at night, and he is extremely easy to avoid. And even if you do forget to close your shrine, just putting salt on the floor will help you avoid him. And even if he does appear, he's just gonna make some noise and stink, and he'll be gone by morning. I think we all have had friends stay over that have done that, so realistically, not too bad. And for that reason, he's only the first entry on the list. Let's keep going. Next up, we have Obarion, another imp-like creature with a much different intention. The Obarion jumps onto the backs of travelers walking through the woods, piggyback style, which is actually where the name comes from, as in some local dialects in the Niigata prefecture, the phrase Obarion is a way to ask for a piggyback ride as you're jumping on someone's back. The appearance of the Obarion isn't necessarily notable as far as yokai go. It's just a imp or goblin-looking creature that's probably around 3 feet tall, typically naked, long head hair, somewhat fuzzy body, and sometimes sharp teeth. Now, your interaction with the Obarion can go one of two ways depending on how you react to him jumping on your back. If he jumps on your back and you immediately try to remove him, he will not leave. And from that point on, every step you take, he will get heavier and heavier until you are crushed under the weight of him. However, if he jumps on your back and you accept the responsibility of carrying him, somewhere along the path from where you are to your house, he will be turned into a bag of money or gold. And when you check your back, you'll notice that you weren't carrying an Obarion, you're carrying a bag of gold. So for that reason, because he does have the opportunity to kill you, he is a little bit more scary than our first entry, but he definitely does have a good side. And in my opinion, if you knew the story and you did encounter one, I feel like it'd be a very cool experience. What would not be a cool experience is running into the Jorogumo, or the Spider Woman. The Jorogumo, in typical yokai fashion, appears as a beautiful woman when you first encounter it, but it soon shapeshifts into something much more scary and deadly. The Jorogumo starts off by striking up a conversation with young, handsome men. Shortly into the conversation, once she knows the man's engaged, she will shapeshift and either turn into a spider completely or grow large spider-like legs. She'll then start weaving the man into a huge silk cocoon until he is trapped in a web. At that point, the Jorogumo will inject him with venom, slowly and painfully killing them. This is definitely a simple yokai, but one of the deadliest we've experienced so far. Unless you happen to be a woman or you are just a man who is simply not her type, there's no escaping this yokai. At least if you're a man. But this next yokai, you can't escape no matter what you are. We're talking about Yama-uba, or the Forest Witch. Right off the bat, Yama-uba is basically the Japanese version of Baba Yaga, and it also has an equally fun to say name, Yama-uba. Baba Yaga, Yama-uba. Both pretty fun. Let me know what you guys think. Yamauba is a yokai that takes the shape of a filthy old woman with long white hair and a thin, pale face. She lives in the wooded mountains of Japan. She is a deceptive yokai as she will lure travelers from the path by offering them food and shelter and a place to stay overnight, all of which she will do. But one thing she will do that she didn't mention, devouring them in their sleep, aka sucking their blood and eating their bodies. But to me, that's not necessarily the most interesting part of this yokai. I think if you're on a trail in rural Japan, probably don't accept any overnight stays from creepy looking ladies. But to me, the most interesting part of the lore is actually the origins of Yamauba. Some scholars believe that the Yamauba are the transformation of the rage and grief of abandoned elderly women who were left in the woods. See, during economic hardship or times of famine, families had to make a tough decision to alleviate dependencies essentially because there wasn't enough food to go around. Typically in these situations, in this old Japanese custom, the family would abandon the oldest woman in their family in the woods. Not cool. But as the story goes, some of those women survived and used their grief and rage and was taken over by a yokai, and now we have Yamauba. Moral of the story with this yokai is don't trust any Yoda-looking ladies in the middle of the woods offering you food and shelter, and if you have a grandma, don't abandon her in the woods, because she might turn into an evil witch. Now, staying in the woods for a second, let's talk about Jaboko, also known as the vampire tree. The Jaboko appears like any other tree, but upon closer inspection, you'll notice that at the base of the tree there is a large pile of human bones. By the time you're aware of the human bones, it'll be too late. The tree will lift you up, and using skinny twigs and branches to pierce your body and suck out your blood. Once the tree is done consuming you, it'll drop you and allow insects and birds to finish you off. At that point, your bones will simply become an addition to the pile that you just noticed. Now you might be thinking, were these trees always yokai, or did they start as regular trees in life? And the answer is Jabokos were just ordinary trees. How they become such deadly vampire trees is pretty unfortunate. Whenever there is a large massacre or huge battle or war, all of the blood that's soaked into the earth would be absorbed by trees, and some of those trees would be transformed into the yokai Jaboko. This is where the list starts to get dangerous, because in this case, the Jaboko does not discriminate on its victims, and by the time you can even be aware of the pile of bones, it's already too late, making it almost impossible to identify. To me, that's terrifying. Jumping out of the forest, let's get into the pond, and let's talk about the kappa. This one's weird, so buckle up. The kappa is a humanoid creature typically around the size of a child, inhabiting in ponds and rivers. They're typically a greenish color, but either have scaly or slimy skin, and their hands and feet are webbed, and they have a turtle shell on their back. As weird as that may sound, this might be the most normal thing about the kappa. Some of the more peculiar traits of the kappa is the fact that they have 3 anuses to produce 3 times the gas as humans. This will be relevant later, and even though they are relatively small, they are physically stronger than a grown man. And the kappa also has a dish on its head holding sacred water, which, if spilt, severely weakens the kappa. This is also relevant for later. Now, with what they look like out of the way, what do they do? And really, that depends drastically. Their actions can range from mischievous all the way down to deadly, and in some very rare situations, they can even provide gifts. On the lesser end of things, kappa are known to lift women's kimonos. And on the darker end of things, if you go in a body of water that they are inhabiting, they are more than willing to kill and eat you and kidnap your children. The kappa are very agile and strong in the water. They are more so clumsy on land, so if there's ever a suspected kappa in the water, never enter it. And if you see one on land, let me tell you how to deal with it. Kappas are all about respect, and if you are able to respect them, and by that I mean treat them like a god, they will for the most part treat you well. However, if you refuse to treat them like a god, let me tell you how to deal with them once they become angry. Since the kappa is obsessed with respect and politeness, if you bow at a kappa, they are obligated to bow back at you. And if you remember the cup of water on their head, this will empty, weakening them severely. Now, at this point, if you want to escape, you can. But if you want to get on the kappa's good side and accept gifts, if you refill this bowl of water, it will serve you for eternity. Or if you rip off its arm in this weakened state, it will offer you knowledge and gifts until you give it its arm back. So there's that. Another way to have the kappa spill their sacred water is by asking them to sumo wrestle. Sumo wrestling is one of their favorite activities, so they will always oblige. Now, during this sumo wrestle, as long as you can get its head water to empty, which isn't too hard, you have weakened them severely and you can proceed just as the first example. Now, if for some reason you just didn't feel like bowing or sumo wrestling, a third way, and probably one of the weirdest ways to repel a kappa, is by farting on them. I'm not even joking, look it up. If you fart on them or at them, this will definitely scare them away. But keep in mind, they have 3 booties, so if they want to get in a farting match, you might need backup. I think I've covered the kappa enough, but one last thing I will say is that they love cucumbers, so there's that. I wanted to have the Kappa so high on the list because there was just so much to say about it, and even though it might not be the scariest, it's definitely the weirdest. Now, staying on the topic of strange for a little bit longer, let's talk about Akamanto, or the bathroom killer. Akamanto, also known as Red Cape, is, as you may have guessed, a yokai. This yokai is described as a masked spirit wearing a large red cloak who floats or flies, and typically resides in public or school bathrooms. Akamanto is described as a male yokai that haunts bathrooms late at night. Akamanto is often also said to haunt female bathrooms specifically. Already we're not off to a great start. The yokai will offer you 2 different types of toilet paper, red or blue. Which one you choose will decide your fate. If you accept the red toilet paper, you'll be stabbed to death and murdered directly on the toilet. And if you choose the blue toilet paper, you'll be strangled to death, once again dying on the toilet. If you try to outsmart the yokai by asking for another color, for example, yellow, do you have yellow toilet paper? That will result in you being drowned face first in the toilet, and likely you didn't flush, so that's disgusting. It is said that the only way to survive an encounter with Akamanto is by refusing either of the toilet papers or simply ignoring them in general, and finishing your business and leaving as soon as possible. Moral of the story being, don't use the bathroom late at night in public places or at school, and if you do not accept red or blue toilet paper and ignore Akamanto entirely. Now, something you can't ignore is a beautiful person. When you see one, it's hard not to be, hey, that's a beautiful person. And in the instance of Kuchisake Onna, it could result in the end of your life. I'm going to keep the description of Kuchisake Onna, or the slit mouth woman, rather brief for 2 reasons. 1, it's the most famous by far on this list, and 2, I literally just covered it in depth in my last video. So if you haven't seen it, watch my last video, Mythical Creatures That Probably Exist. Great video, and I do a deep dive on Kuchisake Onna in that video. But for a quick overview, Kuchisake Onna appears as a beautiful woman wearing a mask, appearing at night. If you walk past her, she'll ask you a question, striking up conversation. Does it sound familiar? What she'll ask you is very important. She'll ask you, am I beautiful? If you tell her, yes, of course you're beautiful, she'll remove her mask, showing you her horribly disfigured face, and she'll ask you again, am I still beautiful? If you say yes, she'll cut your mouth to look like hers, giving you a slit mouth. And if you say no, she'll murder you with a sharp object, typically scissors. Oh, and if you're a real dick and you said no, she's not beautiful before she even takes her mask off, that's gonna get you killed too, so yeah. Another relatively simple yokai, but still deadly. What I'm starting to put together is that it's just never worth it to talk to women, because you never know who may be a yokai. I know we've been joking a lot, but I want to bring this video back to its core for our last yokai on this list. The core of this video being scariest, strangest, deadliest. And with that, we might have the scariest yokai of all, Gasha Dokoro. Translating literally to rattling skeleton, also known as starving skeleton, Gasha Dokoro is something you do not want to encounter under any circumstance. This yokai is a spirit that takes the form of a giant skeleton, and I mean giant, over 10 meters tall giant. This yokai forms when bodies are left unburied on the battlefield. This yokai has a vengeance and is seeking revenge, and has a seemingly endless hunger for death and violence. It is said to wander around at night, typically around 2 a.m., looking for humans to attack and eat their heads off their body. Some of the most terrifying attributes are the fact that they are essentially indestructible and have the ability to become invisible, only to be heard by rattling teeth and bones. And the only way for them to be destroyed is by them satisfying their hunger for violence and revenge. Your only chance of defense is to run and hide, and hope that their thirst for revenge has been satisfied before they get to you. Personally, a 15-foot invisible skeleton with an insane vengeance and hunger for violence that can't be stopped until they are satisfied with no remorse is pretty terrifying. But what do you guys think? Let me know which yokai you guys think were the deadliest, the scariest, the strangest. I think there's different yokai for each of those descriptions, so what it was like to be famous in every time period. The Stone Age. The Stone Age is a cool and interesting time period where a lot of important events took place. But one thing the Stone Age is not known for is its celebrities, specifically because celebrities didn't even exist back then. Neither did the concept of fame, at least not in a way that even closely resembles our modern understanding of it. But that's okay, because we're going to use our caveman brains to understand fame in the Stone Age. During the Stone Age, life was simple. Everything was based around around survival. Humans typically existed in nomadic tribes, and your days were typically spent either chilling or surviving. With that being said, if you were a notable person in your tribe, you could potentially be considered famous. How could you become a notable person in your tribe? Being an exceptionally good hunter, runner, jumper, gatherer, or lover. Stories could be told to other tribes about these famous individuals to help spread their fame. And this early style of social status could potentially award these individuals perks like first dibs on the hunt, larger portions, mating benefits, and more. Now you might be thinking, yeah, that's interesting, but who are the most famous people from the Stone Age? And I'm going to tell you, and it's really quite interesting. The most famous people from the Stone Age were never famous in the Stone Age. They are famous in the modern day. How does this happen? It's because these people from the Stone Age had their bodies preserved from the Stone Age till the modern day. Carbon dating allowed us to pinpoint their age, and the fact that these bodies were so old was extremely notable in the scientific community, making these 5,000-year-old bodies way more notable than anybody ever was in the Stone Age. An example of one of these famous dead bodies is named Ötzi, also known as the Iceman. He is Europe's oldest known natural human mummy, and his body dates back over 5,000 years to the very end of the Stone Age. His body was discovered on September 19th, 1991 on the Austrian-Italy border in the Alps, and his body was so well preserved that they were able to almost identify everything about this individual and learn a lot about the Stone Age as a time period. His body is now one of the most researched bodies of all human history, and his unintentional mummification has been extremely helpful to scientific development. So yeah, if you want to be famous in the Stone Age, be a good hunter or something. But if you really want to be famous in the Stone Age, die high up in a mountain in the ice so your body will be preserved, and let people find it in a few thousand years. And if you really want to be famous, die in a funny pose on the top of a mountain. Honestly, living in a time where social status wasn't really a thing and it didn't matter so much sounds pretty good. But let's get over to the next time period. The Bronze Age, famous itself for its mass production and utilization of bronze. But we're not talking about the fame of the time period, we're talking about being famous in this time period, which fortunately is a little bit more exciting than being famous in the Stone Age. The Bronze Age not only represented development in technology, but also development in society. We went from stone tools to bronze tools, and from small tribes to massive empires. One of the most notable and famous empires being the Assyrians. A great example of a famous individual from this time period is Ashur I. He is known to be the first king of Assyria and is also considered to be the founder of Assyria as an independent city-state. Now, this isn't an Assyrian history lesson, but this is important context to the concept of fame in the time period. So let's get into it. What did it take to be famous during the Bronze Age? How did this fame become perpetuated and have lasting impact? And what benefits did you receive as a famous person in the Bronze Age? Well, for starters, becoming famous in the Bronze Age is a bit of an interesting concept because, like the Stone Age, Bronze Age fame wasn't a thing, at least not in a traditional sense. Fame was more or less of a byproduct of being a notable member in society, specifically a political influence or a leader, which is why Ashur was my pick for a famous example. He was a founding member of the Assyrian state and one of the first kings of Assyria. Pretty notable in my opinion, and definitely someone that people knew about. How was his fame perpetuated? Typically in this case through word of mouth, stories, and potentially even statues and temples in their name and honor. Now, as far as unique benefits from being famous in the Bronze Age, I want to kind of throw a wrench in this because consider this. Being famous in the Bronze Age typically came from political influence or being a highly powerful individual. So the benefits that you had in society weren't typically from the fame you had. The fame you had was because of the influence you had, and that influence you had is what brought you your great lifestyle. An example of this would be, sure, a king is well known and lived an amazing life. But is it because they're well known the fact that they lived an amazing life? No. If there was a bum on the street that everybody knew about because he was just always in the street doing crazy things, would he instantly live a better life because everyone knew him? No. That sort of attention brought them almost no gain and potentially would only bring them more misery, which may sound familiar to modern day times, but we'll get into that later. Whether the fame caused it or not, if you were famous during the Bronze Age, it was because you were a highly influential person, and because of that, you had the ability to live your life to the fullest and have everything that the Bronze Age was able to provide: the best housing, the best clothing, the best bronze tools, the best bronze ornaments, access to land, access to livestock, and if you were really notable, a temple or two. The Iron Age. Once again, new era of technological advancement, new era of civilization. This time it's the introduction and mass production of iron, a much easier to forge and find metal. Iron Age fame was relatively similar to Bronze Age fame, just at a slightly larger scale. Civilization was growing, empires were building, and in some cases rebuilding. And societies most famous in the Iron Age came from places of political power. Now, just to throw another wrench in the system, I will say this. Because I am focusing on society's most famous individuals, this doesn't mean that other notable society members didn't exist. Just the simple scale of their quote-unquote fame could not compare. Due to the nature of these societies being relatively centralized and not yet globalized, being a notable merchant or artist in your city or country could not compare to the level of notoriety that the leaders would have in their own empire and other empires. Quantifying fame is interesting, especially in time periods where it wasn't even really a thing. So definitely keep in mind that this is a trust me bro approach. Regardless of if these leaders were loved or feared, they were known. And a good example from the Iron Age is Boudica. No, not booty call. Boudica. She is actually badass. For context on how famous she was and how important her story was, they literally just made a movie about her story like last year. It's called Boudica, the Queen of War. And it's not like her story was just randomly dug up for this movie. No, her story has been told and held in high regard ever since her life. This is real notability and honestly goes far beyond fame. You might be asking, well, what does she do? Boudica is a significant figure in British history known specifically for her fierce resistance against the Roman occupation, which at the time was spreading quickly. But her fierce resistance against Roman forces united her tribe with other tribes such as the Celtics, which led to a significant rebellion. Her strategy, bravery in battle, determination, and fight for good made her a legendary figure among her people and the Celtics as well. Boudica stood for something, and to her people, she became a symbol of defiance against imperial power, and her legacy continues to inspire discussions about resistance, identity, and leadership to the modern day. Boudica stood for something, believed in it, and fought as hard as she could. That is respectable and also super cool. In short, being a queen made her famous, but being a badass made her an icon. The medieval era. Medieval times. Now this is something we can talk about. Think about castles. Knights in castles at night, mutton and ale. But let's focus on fame. If I asked you, who's your favorite famous person from the medieval era? If you're a history buff, you probably actually have an answer to this. And like the eras before this, your answer is probably somewhat tied to the royal family, social status, and something that's new to this era is the church. But during this period of time, other mediums of expression are becoming more popular and therefore allowing notability to come from more than just your leadership within the community, specifically art and literature. Are these new or exclusive to the Middle Ages? Of course not. But significant development was made during this time period. A great example of an author famous for her literature during the medieval era is Anna Comnena. Ironically, she is a princess, but that wasn't her claim to fame. Due to her social status and access to knowledge, she was proficient in history, literature, philosophy, theology, maths, and medicine. Because of this, she was respected well by her peers. That, combined with her social status, would be enough to be quite famous in the time period, but this is only the beginning. She even ran an orphanage and a hospital with a combined head count of over 10,000, and she even taught medicine as well. But on top of all this, she is most well known for her writing the Alexiad, which simply put is a detailed breakdown of her dad's rule, specifically the Byzantine account of the First Crusade. So what were some unique benefits that famous literature composers could enjoy in the medieval era? Well, specifically patronage from the nobility and the church, which typically came in the form of financial support and social status as a byproduct of being associated with them. They also had special access to education, scholarly resources, allowing them to refine their craft. These composers often also held prestigious positions in royal courts or in religious institutions, gathering them influence and recognition. And additionally, and likely most importantly, the fact that their works were preserved through manuscripts, ensuring their legacy and impact on further generations. This is exactly how Anna's story was told and others like it. Of course, there's other ways you could be famous and other unique benefits of being famous, but for the sake of variety and keeping fresh stories for each time period, this is a pretty cool example in my opinion. The early modern era. Guys, I'm excited. We're getting extremely close to talking about the extreme value that TikTokers provide to society. But before we get to that, we must talk about the fame of the early modern era. If you watched the rich in every time period video or poor in every time period video, then you would know that in the early modern era, there was a lot of international trade, colonization, globalization happening. And for that reason, in those videos, in this time period specifically, I focused on conquests, travel, trades of luxurious goods. And for that reason, in this video, I want to take a different approach. I won't be talking about any famous or notable explorers. Instead, I'm going to be talking about artists. One famous artist in particular. You may know him. His name's William Shakespeare. By the time the early modern era came around, the significance of art in society was solidified, and the different mediums of art has grown exponentially. Shakespeare, for example, was a poet and playwright. He enjoyed considerable success and recognition during his lifetime, particularly in London, where he was an active member of the theater scene, and he was celebrated for his plays and poetry, which appealed to a broad audience, from royalty to commoners, which wasn't extremely common. Shakespeare's works were performed in prestigious venues like the Global Theater, and he got significant wealth from influential figures attending his plays, such as Queen Elizabeth I and King James I. His fame brought him riches and social status, allowing him to buy land and to secure a comfortable lifestyle. Despite the lack of modern media, he was able to still spread his message through his performances, printed plays, and word of mouth through anybody who saw one of his amazing shows. There is no doubt that William Shakespeare is one of the most famous and enduring playwrights of all time. So yeah, early modern era. A great way to get famous is plays or public performances in popular venues, printed materials such as books and pamphlets, and also getting as close as you can to the royal family, of course. The present day. We made it. We started all the way back in the Stone Age, and now we are here to the present day to talk about all the amazing celebrities that we have, because celebrities are a thing now, and some people are famous from being famous, and some people are rich from just being famous. It's a great and completely fair time. And since I've given an example of a famous person from every other time period, let me give you one for the present day. You're looking at it. Me, baby. Trust me, bro. The most famous stick figure in all the land. That's not true, because this guy still exists, but I'd like to think we're a notable stick. On a serious note, over history, things have become more and more decentralized, which is cool, and fame is not exempt from that, meaning that the ways that you can get famous now are seemingly endless, especially with the invention of the internet. Obviously, political leaders, religious leaders, and influential people of the such are still famous, but now there's a lot more ways to also become and stay famous, such as models, journalists, athletes, gamers, content creators, and more. Modern day celebrities enjoy a lot of luxuries, one of which being getting free things that they could already afford, special treatment in almost every scenario, and other cool stuff like that. But yeah, if you are curious about what fame looked like in every time period, let this serve as a very brief and extremely oversimplified explanation. I tried my best in each time period to provide an example of a famous person, how they would have gotten famous, how they would have stayed famous, and the benefits they would have gotten as a famous person. I loved researching this video because I learned about some cool women of history, which I didn't know about, which is always cool. The scariest mythical creatures that probably existed. That is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, and this list is spooky. If you're new here, this is actually the third video in my Scariest Mythical Creatures series, but you don't need to have watched those videos to understand this video. Each of my Mythical Creatures videos is a new list, and just like the other lists, this list starts scary and gets even scarier as the video goes on, and all of these creatures are from different parts of the world. Let's begin. Starting off in the birthplace of freedom, we have Mothman from the US of A. Mothman is one of the most recently discovered creatures on this list, with his story only originating in 1966, relatively recently compared to some of the entries on this list. Mothman was first spotted in the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, but his legend has grown immensely over the years. Early witnesses described Mothman as a large black creature with glowing red eyes, 7 to 10 feet tall and muscular. They claimed it appeared bird-like in nature, but was much too big to be a bird. Something interesting about the Mothman lore is that sightings really only took place from November 15th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967, meaning that there was only about 13 months of sightings. December 15th is actually a pretty significant date when it comes to Point Pleasant history. It was the date of a rather tragic event. The Silver Bridge, also known as the Point Pleasant Bridge, a bridge that connected West Virginia and Ohio, collapsed. Not only did it collapse, but it collapsed during rush hour traffic. This resulted in the death of 46 people and the permanent loss of 2 bodies. Now, why am I bringing up the Silver Bridge incident? Well, it's because in 1975, the book by John Keel, The Mothman Prophecies, claimed that not only was there paranormal events related to the sightings, but that there was also a connection to Mothman and the collapse of the bridge. To me, that's a pretty serious claim. During the 13 months of active Mothman sightings, there was hundreds, and later on it was revealed that there was over 100 people that were too scared to even admit that they saw the Mothman. With that being said, I put Mothman as number 1 on the list because I believe that he is definitely scary, but his intentions are too unknown to be truly evil. Although some things have been attributed to him, the only real claims that can be made against him is that he was standing there menacingly, and also the fact that he would potentially bang on the roofs of teenagers' cars. If you've seen any of our other videos, you know that these are extremely tame actions for a mythical creature, and I also believe that the Mothman could have very well existed simply because of all of the evidence there is and how passionate the Point Pleasant community is. This city has a big sculpture of the Mothman in its downtown. Like, this is the one thing to happen in Point Pleasant, and they are not living it down. My personal thoughts on the matter are that since he was only seen for a short amount of time, I think it's very possible that this could have been someone playing an elaborate prank or trying to be a superhero for a short amount of time until they got bored of it. But even if Mothman is some sort of supernatural being, I believe the scariest thing about him is his appearance. And for that reason, he is only number 1 on the list. And like I mentioned earlier, this video gets scarier as we go on. So let's move on. Second, we have Nixie. The Nixie stems from Scandinavian and German origins. These creatures almost always depict a human female, but they can vary from looking like an old woman with green teeth, skin, and hair to looking like a beautiful woman with green teeth, skin, and hair. They are also often covered in moss, seaweed, and seashells. Although Nixies are sometimes described as having a fish tail in the water, they can appear on land in full humanoid form. But one tell that always gives them away is that their clothes are always slightly damp and dripping water. Nixies are commonly described as nymphs or water sprites or even mermaids, and all of which are technically correct, but I believe that most people would probably identify what I've already described as a mermaid. The one thing that makes the Nixie rather unique is the fact that the lore is much older and dates way further back, and also their unique abilities. Some traits that the Nixie shares with mermaids is their infatuation with humans and their beauty and songs used to seduce sailors, typically into danger. But that isn't always the case. Some Nixies require an annual human sacrifice. Some Nixies have a lust for humans, which has a romantic and not deadly ending, which I won't get into any further detail, but you can imagine. Nixies also have the unique ability to control the weather if irritated. With all of this being said, I think the Nixies are very interesting and infatuating, but I definitely think they are scarier than Mothman for the simple reason that they have more malice intent. Typically, not always, but typically. Whereas with Mothman, we have no reported deaths or requirements of sacrifice. He's not a sexy green lady, but he's also not necessarily trying to drown you. So I feel like for that reason, the Nixie is a little bit scarier, but not quite as scary as our next entry from Down Under. I'm of course talking about the Bunyip, not the Bunyin. That's something else. The Bunyip. Originating from Aboriginal mythology of southeastern Australia, the Bunyip is described as an amphibious creature lurking in waterbeds, swamps, creeks, and other watery places. Although physical descriptions of the Bunyip vary drastically, the most common descriptions typically include a round head, an elongated neck, and the body resembling an ox or a hippopotamus or even a manatee. The Bunyip has also been reported to make roaring or booming noises. The Bunyip inhabits and protects these shallow waters and preys upon anyone who dares go near them. One thing that I find pretty ironic is that the Bunyip sometimes is described as having glowing red eyes and also drowning people. So if you really think about it, it's kind of a combination of Mothman and Nixie, the best of both worlds. Or the worst, I guess. The story of the Bunyip and different accounts and drawings have existed for hundreds of years, adding a lot to its validity of its actual history. And although it's never been proven to exist, there are many that would argue the Bunyip is very real. That, combined with the fact that the Bunyip is definitely the most violent creature so far on the list, I'd have to give it the number 3 spot. Any huge creature with huge claws, glowing red eyes, chilling in the water, just waiting to rip you to shreds is pretty scary in my book. The Bunyip is terrifying, and who knows, it might just be real too, but let's hope not. Next up, we have what may be the silliest little guy on the entire list. We have the Tokolosh, or the Tikalosh from South Africa. Physically, the Tokolosh resembles a dwarf-like or even goblin-like water spirit. It is a mischievous and evil spirit that can become invisible by only drinking water or swallowing a stone, which is weird. Could you just imagine like 2 Tokoloshes? It's like their time to go be mischievous, and one of them's like, hey, let's go invisible, let's go drink water, and the other guy's just like, no, I think I'm gonna swallow the stone. And the other guy's like, are you sure? We could just drink this water. And he's like, no, I like swallowing the stone. I guess no one said they were normal. I know I've kept this segment light so far, but the true reality of the Tokoloshe is rather dark. The Tokoloshe's sole purpose is to cause humans harm and discomfort at the very least. At its least harmful, a Tokoloshe can be used to scare children, but its true power can be used to cause illness and even death to its victim. Now, if you caught what I said there, you might be questioning, what do you mean they can be used by? Who's using the Tokoloshes? Well, Tokoloshes are called upon by malevolent people used to cause trouble to others. These goblin-like creatures are essentially people's henchmen to do their dirty work. These benevolent people are typically witches, focusing specifically on dark magic. And whatever jobs these witches task these Tokoloshes with, they will do until completion. And during the night, they will execute their plan. A really interesting part about Tokoloshe lore is how commonly it's been used in legal situations in South Africa, specifically as a scapegoat for robbery, assault, and murder. I don't know about you, but a short, green, powerful being that could be invisible, appearing in your house in the night that can cause you anything from a slight discomfort to death sounds pretty scary to me. And the fact that there's not only just headlines, but court cases involving the Tokoloshe as the suspect is the reason why it's included on this list on creatures that could have probably existed. The biggest reason why I put the Tokoloshe above the Bunyip is the simple fact that the Bunyip can simply be avoided by not going to a swamp at night. The Tokoloshe is something that if it's set on you, you're not escaping. And your only real hope is that its intention is just something mischievous and not worse. But it gets worse with our next entry, El Silbón, or the Whistler. El Silbón is a Colombian and Venezuelan folklore creature who might have the worst backstory we've heard yet. The legend states that El Silbón started as a young boy who was a spoiled brat whose parents catered to his every wish. One night he demanded his father hunt him a deer as it was his favorite meat, but his father didn't return home that night with the deer. The son killed his father and cut out his organs. He gave these organs to his mother to cook for dinner. His mother cooked them, and as they ate them, she realized the meat tasted off. She began to ask where her husband was, and she soon put the dots together. Obviously, she was shocked, and things did not go well. The mother cursed her son for eternity, and afterwards his grandfather had ordered him to be tied up to a post in the middle of the countryside. He lashed his back open until his back was destroyed. The grandfather placed alcohol, chili peppers, and lemon juice in his wounds, and then he put his father's organs in a bag and placed it on the boy's back. The grandfather released 2 rabid dogs upon him, but before he released the dog, the grandfather condemned the boy to carry the bag of his father's remains for eternity. From that point on, the boy was now El Silbón, a 3 to 6 meter tall, skeleton-like creature with a bag of bones on its back, with a bloodlust and a vengeance. Why do they call him El Silbón, or the Whistler? It's because he whistles a very specific tune with the musical notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and then B in that order. It is said that if you hear this tone, it is a sign of your death. They say if you hear the whistle close to you, your death is far away. But they say if the whistle is in the distance and faint, your death is closer than you think. The Whistler is typically known to target drunks and womanizers, but it's not uncommon for him to target innocent victims as well. The Whistler uses the element of surprise and typically jumps out of trees. He rips his victims to shreds and adds their bones and remains to the bag on his back, forever carrying all of his victims with him. I don't know about you, but if I heard a very faint whistle and looked around and then saw a 3 meter tall skeleton-like creature jump out of a tree and rip my bones out, I wouldn't be too happy about it. You might think this story is a bit over the top, but if you talk to any resident of the Los Llanos region of the East Andes in Colombia and Venezuela, I think you'd hear some convincing stories. Kuchi Sake Ona, the slit-mouthed woman. That is the second last entry on this list, and one of the most terrifying by far. The slit-mouthed woman is a malevolent figure from Japanese folklore. She is described as a malicious spirit in the form of a woman with long, straight black hair, pale skin, and scissors or some sort of sharp object in her hand. She is otherwise beautiful, but if she removes her mask, you might change your opinion. Encounters with the slit-mouthed woman are simple but gruesome and go something like this. You see her and she stops you in your tracks and asks you, "Am I pretty?" If you say no, she'll instantly kill you with the sharp object she has. Now, if you do say she's beautiful, she'll remove her mask, exposing her horribly disfigured and scarred mouth, and ask you, "How about now?" If you tell her no, she will use the sharp object to kill you. But if you agree that she is still beautiful, she'll only disfigure your face to look like hers. Some believe the split-mouthed woman is a victim of violence and only seeking vengeance. Others believe that she is a yokai, and this is her natural form. If the death and face mutilation wasn't scary enough to justify her position in the list, consider this. This is the only mythical creature that requires you to talk to a woman. And if that's not scary, I don't know what is. Now, we've finally made it to the last entry on this list. This is one of the most requested creatures by far ever since I released my first video, which if you haven't seen, watch it after this. Keep in mind, this is only the third installment. This is an ongoing series on the channel, and if you want to see more creatures, please comment them below. I want to make as many videos as you guys want to watch. Now, with that being said, let's get into our final creature. Not actually into it, unless that's what you're into. Regardless, our final entry is, and I can already feel some of you guys losing it right now because I'm finally talking about it. It's the Manananggal. Everybody who commented this on all of my videos must have been on a mission to give me nightmares, because this is by far, almost inarguably, the scariest mythical creature of all time. At least it's got to be up there. It's definitely the scariest one that I've covered so far. If you're from the Philippines, you know what I'm going to be talking about. But if you're not, let me just give you a sample of the Manananggal. As you could have guessed, the Manananggal is a Filipino creature. And believe it or not, that's not the scariest part. I'm joking. The Manananggal has large, bat-like wings, a long, thin tongue, vampire-like teeth, and werewolf-like claws. Also, it's not wearing pants. Why? Because it doesn't have a bottom half. The Manananggal's organs and innards are simply dangling from below itself. To be fair, it does have a bottom half. It can just remove it at any time. During the day, the Manananggal are said to be beautiful women who live normal lives and can even be married or in relationships. But at night, they show their true form. Their arms turn into their wings, and they separate their torso from their legs, leaving their organs hanging as they fly through the night sky. They prey on sleeping people, and their favorite victim are pregnant women. They insert their long tongue into their victim, and in the case of pregnant women, they eat the fetus. And in the case of men, they eat their organs and drink their blood. Now, I don't think there's necessarily a question of why the Manananggal is so terrifying and disgusting. But you may be thinking, is this really something that probably existed? Well, let me offer this. Scholars claimed that there were architectural elements changed by the fear of the Manananggal, specifically in rural regions. Two primary changes include slanted roofs to prevent the Manananggal from landing on it, and strategically placed windows away from bedrooms for reasons you can probably assume. I always love reading the comments you guys leave, and I always love researching the creatures that I end up putting on these lists. If there's a creature that I missed, or if there's some details I missed, please comment them below. Now, keep in mind, these videos are just for fun, and if something sounds a little bit off, just trust me, bro. If you could only eat one last meal, what would it be? In this video, I'm going to show you some of the strangest and weirdest meal requests by inmates on death row who only have one last meal. If you're unfamiliar, death row is a funny little place where when you have done something so bad, so horrible, so inconceivable that the government believes it's just best to kill you, you go on death row. But within death row, there lies a custom, a last meal. On the day before your execution, you are granted one final meal. Now, the inmate can request whatever they want, but as far as actually getting that meal, they have to fall within some guidelines. For example, if you think that you can outsmart the system and live forever by simply ordering a shamrock shake and a McRib, two items that never exist at the same time, it's not gonna work. You're just gonna die hungry. Now let's begin. Gerald Lee Mitchell. We're starting off this list with a rather tame request, as we're going to get stranger and stranger down the list. What Mitchell did to achieve this final meal was anything but tame. To summarize it, he met up with some people to sell them some stuff, and instead of selling them anything, he robbed them and shot them. What does a swell fellow like Gerald request? Well, all he requested was an assorted bag of Jolly Ranchers. It's definitely weird, but not too crazy. I mean, if you have a sweet tooth and you like hard candy, it's probably a safe bet. Definitely wouldn't be my choice, but let's keep going. Up next, we have Timothy McVeigh, likely one of the most evil people on this list. His request was quite strange. If you're unfamiliar with Timothy McVeigh, he is a domestic terrorist who perpetrated the Oklahoma City bombing on April 19th, 1995, a bombing that killed 168 people and injured almost 700. This man is seriously evil. And what does somebody so dark and twisted order for their last meal? Well, apparently 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Okay, I'll be honest. Up until this point, I was a mint chip enjoyer and defender, because everybody I would talk to would say it's the grossest thing in the world and that it's for weirdos. But after learning about this, I kind of get it. Timothy reportedly ate the ice cream alone in a windowless cell the night before he was lethally injected. Compared to what's coming on this list, this is still a relatively tame request, although I think it's definitely more strange than a bag of Jolly Ranchers. Moving away from the sweets for a bit, we have a request from Victor Fugger. Fugger was a convicted murderer and was executed by hanging in Iowa. But prior to his hanging, for his final meal request, what he requested was 1 olive with the pit. This sounds odd, but he had a master plan behind it. Fugger ate the olive and left the pit in his suit pocket, the suit he was to be buried in. Fugger hoped the tree symbolizing peace would sprout from his grave. But instead, officials found the pit in his pocket during burial and removed it. Not to give this murderer too much credit, but this was honestly a pretty interesting entry on this list. The plan, the execution, and the symbolism is pretty unique, and although his plan failed, it's still a very strange request. Personally, even if I had this idea, I don't think I'd execute it, because if I'm getting one last meal, there's no way I'm eating 1 olive. Can you imagine just sitting there, looking at the death menu? You're like, double cheeseburger, ice cream, fries, pizza, tacos. Well, it's the last thing I'm ever going to eat ever, so how about 1 olive? Velma Barfield was the first woman to be executed by lethal injection after the reinstatement of capital punishment, and she was even given the title of Death Row Granny. And what exactly did Death Row Granny do? Well, she was a serial killer and was convicted of 1 murder, but eventually confessed to a total of 6 murders. She was also convicted for 7 counts of writing bad checks, but that's literally irrelevant in comparison to what else she did. What is relevant, however, is what she requested for her final meal, which was a bag of cheese doodles and a can of Coca-Cola. I've never heard of cheese doodles and had to Google it, but I guess they're basically just like Cheetos, which to me is a super underwhelming final request. Like, if you're gonna order some sort of snack, at least get a good one. And also, why order a snack? It's a meal. Get something actually real and just get Cheetos on the side. Why waste it? But maybe I'm just naive in assuming that serial killers have the forethought of planning a proper last meal. Speaking of proper last meal, Gary Carl Simmons Jr. definitely did a much better job at maximizing the opportunity. Gary, as you probably could have assumed by this point, was a murderer. But not only that, he was also a grocery store butcher and a drug addict. So all around, just a great guy. But what did this beef-cutting, crack-smoking, person-killing person order for their last meal? Well, I'll tell you. For his last meal, he requested a 29,000 calorie meal consisting of Doritos, pizza, McDonald's fries, strawberry shakes, and ice cream. For context, the average person only needs about 2,000 calories per day, meaning that he ordered enough food to feed himself sufficiently for over 2 weeks. Keep in mind, this was the day before his death. This dude literally thought he was going to turn into Matt Stoney the day before his execution. I think the most disappointing part is that he didn't even finish it. Like, if you're going to talk a big game, back it up. Doing a complete pivot from utter gluttony, we have a rather selfless request from an inmate. Philip Ray Workman was convicted for murdering a police officer after robbing a Wendy's restaurant in Memphis. Philip was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and for his last meal, he requested a large vegetarian pizza, but not for himself. He requested this to be given to a homeless man in Nashville. Now, that alone is kind of strange and unique, but what's really interesting was the fact that this request was actually denied. And as evil as Philip Workman may have been, I do believe that if you are going to offer a request, honor it. Especially something as simple as delivering a pizza to a homeless man. For this reason, when news broke that the prison refused the request, many across the state of Tennessee followed through with his wish, bringing hundreds of pizzas to local homeless shelters, which is honestly quite heartwarming for such a strange situation. This might be one of my favorite entries on the list, simply because although in life, Philip was not a great person, in death, he was able to do something for the less fortunate. Continuing on the trend of final meal requests that had huge impacts, we have Lawrence Russell Brewer. And the impact that his last meal created was definitely not a positive one, unlike Philip's. Lawrence's last meal was extravagant. He ordered 2 fried chicken steaks drenched in gravy with onions, a bacon triple cheeseburger, a cheese omelet loaded with ground beef, tomatoes, onions, bell peppers, and jalapenos, a massive bowl of ketchup smothered fries, barbecued meat by the pound, a half loaf of white bread, 3 fully decked out fajitas, a Pizza Hut meat lovers pizza, and a pint of Blue Bell ice cream, and a piece of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts, and 3 root beers. Now, the sheer quantity of food, I think, alone warrants this place on the list, but what makes this really strange is that most prisons wouldn't even accept a request so large. However, the Texas prison system did. But the worst part about all of this is that Brewer refused to eat any of the food when it arrived, stating he wasn't hungry. This pissed off administrators so much that Texas stopped honoring last meal requests altogether after this request. A chain reaction I'm assuming a lot of death row inmates do not appreciate. Last but definitely not least, we have by far the strangest meal request, and it's not even close. James Edward Smith was a murderer. He was executed for capital murder in Texas. But we're not talking about crimes. We're talking about meals. So what exactly did James order for his last meal request? He ordered a lump of dirt. There is no available explanation for why he requested this dirt, and my only assumption is that he is either mentally gone or he had a plan, similar to the olive pit guy. As strange as this simple but odd request was, to me the funniest part was that because dirt was not on the list of approved foods, James had to settle for a cup of yogurt. I don't know why, but when I read that, that just cracked me up. Dangerous criminals that are still on the loose, or at least were never caught. If you're a Trust Me Bro fan, then you would know that this list is only going to get more dangerous and more evil as the list goes on. So let's get started. On a chilly November day in 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper hopped on a Northwest Orient flight from Portland to Seattle, and he looked like any other traveler in his neat suit and tie, but Cooper had a wild plan up his sleeve. Shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to the flight attendant revealing that he had a bomb in his briefcase, and he demanded $200,000 cash, 4 parachutes, and a refueling truck waiting for him at Seattle. As the plane touched down, the drama unfolded quietly. The authorities, though shocked, met his demands, trading the cash, parachutes, and fuel for the release of 36 passengers. Cooper kept a few crew members on the flight, and they took off again, aiming for Mexico City. Once again, shortly after takeoff, high above the remote forest of southwest Washington, under the cover of night, Cooper made a bold escape. He strapped one of the parachutes onto his back, secured the money, and jumped out of the plane through the aft door. The plane eventually landed without Cooper, kicking off a massive manhunt. Despite extensive searches and a lot of speculation, Cooper vanished, leaving behind only a few clues, including a decaying package of $5,800 found years later by a boy near Columbia River. As you likely already know, or probably assumed by the title of this video, D.B. Cooper was never caught. I wanted to start this first segment with a story rather than just saying D.B. Cooper. One, because the story is just so interesting, and two, because I wanted to try a new format. What do you guys think? But if it wasn't already obvious, the first entry on this list is D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper is likely the most famous entry on this list, and he's also the most tame entry, meaning that his actions, although dangerous and scary, were not nearly as evil as compared to the other entries on this list. But I still want to take a deep dive going into the exact danger that D.B. Cooper put people in and the effects that this could have had if things went wrong. Okay, for starters, this was a literal hijacking on a commercial flight with 42 total people on the flight, 36 people including Cooper, and then also 6 staff, 2 pilots and 4 flight attendants. Now, it is my assumption that D.B. Cooper did not actually have a bomb, and then that was just a bluff to get the authorities to comply with his demands. But if he did have some makeshift homemade bomb in his briefcase, things could have went a lot differently. For starters, if the bomb was made poorly, it could have detonated on its own at any point, causing all 42 people to die on this plane, assuming that the plane doesn't crash over top of people and kill more people. That alone would have been catastrophic and a huge tragedy. Now, fortunately, as we know, that wasn't the case, but what did inspire D.B. Cooper to put so many people's lives in danger? Well, like we mentioned, money. He requested $200,000 cash, which in today's money is equivalent to $1.5 million, which is no small sum of money. Now, whether or not you would act on this elaborate scheme to try to get $1.5 million is up to you, but personally, I have no interest in doing anything of the sort. And one thing I find kind of ironic is that D.B. Cooper was smart. Every part of this plan was calculated and executed perfectly, which leads me to believe that he was a smart and competent individual. I say this because with the skills he had and the planning he had, I don't doubt that he could have made this money honestly. But my assumption is that he must have had some sort of incident happen in his life to make him do something so crazy, which I would love to know that story, but I doubt we ever will. Anybody who's willing to hijack a plane, risk the lives of others, and steal money, in my books, is definitely dangerous. And in the eyes of the law, a criminal, which is why I added D.B. Cooper to this video. But honestly, Cooper was kind of a class act when it came to being a criminal. He didn't make a scene on the plane to scare any of the other travelers. He allowed all of the passengers off of the plane. Many of them didn't even know what was going on. He only kept a few staff members on the plane. One of the flight attendants on the plane said that he wasn't cruel or nasty at all and that he seemed confident and nice even. And once he got his money and parachute, he was gone. When he opened the aft door of the plane, the pilots even called back to him on the PA system and asked him if he needed help. And his last words were no, and we never heard from him again. So although I do not condone the actions of D.B. Cooper whatsoever, when When it comes to dangerous criminals, I think that he went about it in a very interesting way, which is no doubt why his story is so famous and which is why I wanted to have him on this list. This, in my opinion, is probably the best case scenario when it comes to a plane hijacking situation. But let's keep going. Next up on our list, we have one of the most notorious gangsters of all time and one of the most elusive criminals in the entire world. He is known as the boss of bosses, and his name is Simeon Mikhailovich. If you're unfamiliar with Simeon, you're not alone, and this is likely because Simeon is not an infamous American gangster that's been portrayed in movies. He's not even American at all. He's of Ukrainian, Russian, and Israeli descent, but that doesn't mean his resume is any less qualified, or should I say blood splattered. I want to make very clear that I am not hyping up this person in any way, shape, or form. This person is not a good person. I'm simply speaking with emphasis for storytelling purposes. With that being said, let's get into some of Simeon's credentials. For starters, the nickname Boss of Bosses was not a self-given nickname. The government agencies of the European Union and the United States described Simeon as the boss of bosses of most Russian mafia syndicates in the world. And he is believed to be directing a multi-billion-dollar international crime empire. And he is described by the FBI as the most powerful and dangerous gangster in the world. Oh, yeah, and if that's not enough, he was literally in the top 10 fugitive list from October 23rd, 2009, all the way till December 17th, 2015. But after hearing all of this, you might be asking yourself, what did this knucklehead get up to that got him in so much trouble? And let me tell you, this is the exact list of charges that put him on the FBI 10 most wanted fugitive list. I'm reading this directly off Wikipedia. Fraud by wire, racketeer, influenced, and corrupt organizations act conspiracy, mail fraud, money laundering conspiracy, money laundering, arms trafficking, drugs trafficking, human trafficking, aiding and abetting, murder, smuggling, prostitution, securities fraud, filing false registration with the SEC, false filing with the SEC, falsification of books and records. And I'm sure there's more. So as you can tell, this guy's a little bit of a goofball. And I'm sure you probably noticed in that list there was prostitution. And I'm sure it means something else, but I think it's kind of funny to imagine this guy selling some ass when times were tough. But honestly, I can't judge. You gotta do what you gotta do. And if this channel goes under, I might have to do the same. Mikhailovich did a lot to acquire so much wealth, but one of the first things he did to start making money was trading foreign exchange currency, or Forex, which at the time in the USSR was illegal, which he was fined and charged for, and this is likely the catalyst that got him involved in organized crime. A lot of the wealth that he controlled came from a lot of high-level corporate scams. One of my favorites including a publicly traded company on the Toronto Stock Exchange. YBM Magnex Incorporated was a publicly traded stock on the Toronto Stock Exchange, which in only a short amount of time was able to grow by over 2,000%. Seemingly a promising company and a great investment opportunity. But that can be further from the truth. Mikhailovich used his economics degree and deception to forge numbers in the company's accounting, making the company seem like it was growing substantially when in reality it was just laundering money. The headquarters of this company was raided once Canadian journalists caught on that these Russian mobsters were involved with this company, and the day after the raid, the company's stock became worthless almost overnight. I'm sure there was a few savvy investors who weren't too happy about this. It goes without saying that with somebody so influential, so powerful, and so rich in the organized crime world, there is no doubt that they are absolutely a dangerous individual. And because this video is focused on criminals and not killers, I figured I would keep the crimes I focused on pretty diverse. But if you are waiting for murder stories, the next entry is for you. But be warned, it is gruesome and extremely upsetting. The final entry on this list is a serial child assaulter from Australia. He is only known by the nickname Mr. Cruel, and his story is nothing less than evil. Now, if you've seen a few Trust Me Bro videos, then you would know that we use the word assault to reference something much more evil and disturbing. Something that YouTube wouldn't like me to say, and something that I honestly wouldn't like to say either. Mr. Cruel haunted Melbourne, Australia during the late 1980s and early 1990s. He's infamous for his calculated and sinister attacks targeting young girls in their homes. The way he operated was chillingly malicious. He would break into the family's homes at night, often while the family was still asleep. He would abduct, assault, and then later release the victims miles from their homes. He did this on 3 separate occasions to 3 separate victims, and the time that he kept these victims varied from 18 hours all the way up to 55 hours before they were released. What really set Mr. Cruel apart from other criminals with similar intentions was the fact that he had such a methodical approach to avoiding capture. He wore gloves and a mask, making sure to leave virtually no forensics evidence behind. He also took measures to confuse the police, like bathing his victims to remove any traces of DNA before releasing them. He literally thought of everything to cover his tracks, including instructing the kids not to look at him and using a very monotone voice to keep his voice generic and unrecognizable. The case that he is most known for is also the most tragic and is one that is still kept a mystery: the abduction of Carmen Chan in 1991. Unlike his other victims, Carmen was never returned home and was found deceased a year later. And unfortunately, after this case, there was absolutely no more evidence about Mr. Cruel or this case. Despite massive police efforts, including Operation Spectrum, which was specifically launched to catch just Mr. Cruel, he has never been identified. The case remains one of Australia's most troubling mysteries, not just because of the crimes he committed, but also the fact that he is still on the loose today. I don't think there's any debate or any further detail required on why Mr. Cruel is such a dangerous criminal, and it's truly upsetting and disturbing that he was never caught and justice was never served. Just for context of how slippery Mr. Cruel was, when the Spectrum Task Force was created in May of 1991, over the next 3 years, the police searched 30,000 homes, interviewed 27,000 suspects, and spent a total of $3.8 million and still collected no meaningful evidence. To this very day, there is still a $1 million reward for any information on Carmen Chan. In a lot of cases that end up going cold and unsolved, it's very easy to blame the police for negligence, but in this case, it definitely doesn't seem like there's a lack of trying, which in my opinion makes this case much more scary and much more upsetting. But with that being said, let me know what you guys thought of this video. I typically only cover killers, but in this video I wanted to cover criminals and make the video a bit more dynamic by including different types of people on the list. Let me know what you thought. Also, let me know what you thought about the story-based segment at the beginning. Did you like the storytelling and visuals on screen? Your input means a lot because I want to make videos that you guys enjoy. And the last thing I'll say is, if this is your first Trust Me Bro video, why not subscribe? We make really cool videos and you'll probably like it. Trust me, bro. Peace. You wake up to the sound of a horse-drawn buggy galloping down a cobblestone road. This is a familiar sound. Every morning the coroners come and collect all of the dead and take them to a burn pile. Today's pile is particularly large. You take a deep breath and reluctantly get out of bed. Today is like any other. You skip breakfast and get straight to work because there is no time to spare. You start by getting dressed. You open your closet and are met with your alter ego, the plague doctor, and for many, the last thing they see before death. You begin by putting on long undergarments tucked into each other, long johns tucked into socks, undershirt tucked into pants, anything to keep out the bad air. Next, you put on a thick, ankle-length overcoat, which has been sealed with animal fat and pleasantly scented wax to prevent any air from seeping in. Next, you put on your boots and gloves, making sure they maintain a tight seal. Following that, you put on your bird-like beak mask. Every morning, you empty the beak and refill it. This beak serves a very important purpose. It was believed that the spread of the plague was caused by bad air, particularly bad smells. Therefore, the thought was, if you could maintain good smells near your nose, you would be protected. The beak had 2 nostrils at the very end of it and was filled with herbs and spices, particularly lavender. The freshly stuffed beak served as a perfect filtration system, or so they thought. The beak is tightly fastened to your face, making sure to prevent any ways for bad air to leak in. Finally, you put on your leather hat and grab your cane, which will be proving very useful very shortly. Now that you're fully equipped, you grab your medical tool bag and you're out the door. You live in an area that's relatively untouched by the plague, at least comparatively speaking, but you work day in and day out in the most devastated parts. Plague doctors were hired by cities to help provide services to low-income citizens who weren't able to pay for proper care, and unfortunately, that typically meant you were dealing with the worst cases possible. These slummish conditions of these poverty-stricken neighborhoods allowed disease to run wild and destroy almost everything in its path. You approach your first house call, checking up on a patient you visited the day before. Before you could even get to this person's door, you are met with a disgruntled and obviously sickly person, desperate for answers and help. This is where one of the use cases of this cane comes in. Tensions were reasonably high, and unfortunately for many people, proper care was simply not an option. People were desperate to get any time or attention they could from the plague doctors, even if that meant assaulting them. It sounds counterintuitive, but people were desperate. You are literally beating people off with a stick to maintain a distance between yourself and people who will likely be dead within the next few days. You enter the residence of your first house call and things are looking grim. Your patient has buboes all over their neck, arms, and legs. These buboes are the inflammation of the lymph nodes, causing large blood and pus-filled boils to appear all over the patient's body. These painful buboes also burst and leave open, oozing wounds. You use your cane again for its second purpose, checking if your patient is even alive. You maintain your distance and nudge them a few times. In this case, your patient wakes up, but only barely. Almost all of the information available is anecdotal, and your tool bag is light and unequipped. For this specific patient, you recommend bloodletting. You open a jar of leeches and start placing the leeches on the buboes to help drain them. As these leeches are applied, you hand this patient a bouquet of flowers to allow them to smell good air. After a roughly 30-minute treatment, you let them know that you don't believe they'll be alive by morning. In this case, you do take a will and last testament from them, something that you'll be able to provide to any of their living family. You pack up your things and you're back onto the street. It's cold. gloomy, and the street is only populated with rats feeding off dead bodies and the smell of death. Although helping people is your only goal, typically even the sight of you was a bad omen. Many people only saw plague doctors days before death, and therefore associated seeing you with dying in the near future. On your walks between house calls, you always ponder on what could be causing such a disease. You know this isn't the first plague, not by a long shot. From the plague of Justinian to the Black Death that eliminated almost a third of Europe, to now, with the resurgence of the plague in Venice, we still have very limited information about what is happening. At this point, the government has tried quarantining the sick and those who even appear to potentially be sick, putting them on a remote island and burning all of their earthly belongings to make sure that there is nothing left to spread the disease. It seems like every day the death count only rises and rises, and those who become infected by the disease live a horrible last few days. The disease starts with the appearance of these buboes, which is typically a mark of death. These buboes multiply in numbers and grow in size, sometimes getting as large as an apple. Hours or potentially even days later, you are met with an extreme fever and a throat-scratching cough. Your body rejects all foods and liquids, and sometimes dehydration would kill you before the plague could. This disease can be so fast-acting that someone can go to bed feeling relatively fine and not wake up in the morning. Before germ theory was ever a thing, miasma theory was the prominent scholarly belief. The theory was simple and refers to the bad air I mentioned earlier. The miasma theory stated that diseases such as the plague were spread through bad air or night air, or essentially noxious gas, meaning that it was the smell that carried the disease and nothing else, which is why the plague doctors kept good smells, perfumes, and spices and herbs in their mask, as the good smells would counteract the bad smells, which unfortunately wasn't extremely effective. It's also for this reason why your thick coat is covered in animal fats and scented wax. You arrive at your next house call, but this patient is no longer with you. But you knew that going into it. You're not treating this person, you're performing an autopsy. On top of treating people, witnessing and writing wills and testaments, plague doctors also performed autopsies when requested to collect information about cause of death and the disease itself. In this case, you're documenting the body of this victim and checking their insides to see what exactly was affected by the plague. This is one of the most dangerous actions for plague doctors, as this presents them with the highest opportunity to get infected bodily fluids on their clothing and on their skin, which could easily infect and kill the doctor. Those who became infected with the plague died within 3 to 8 days, and the death rate of the plague was 80%, meaning that this disease for most people was a death sentence. The deadliness of this disease was actually part of its downfall, as although it was spread through unhygienic, tightly packed urban areas, due to the fact that it killed so quickly, it got to a point where it started running out of victims and started killing itself off as it was unable to find and spread itself to other hosts. Near the end of the plague, people began to understand that transmission occurred when people were in contact with each other. Therefore, quarantining and maintaining distance from others became much more popular. It wasn't known at the time, but the biggest spread of the disease was through infected fleas that lived on rats. Rats that also populated these urban areas heavily. The word quarantine actually comes from the word quarantino, which means 40 days in Italian. This is because when boats would dock at the ports of Italy, they would make these sailors stay on their boat for 40 days to ensure that they were not bringing any disease with them. It's interesting to retrospectively look back at the practices of the time, but unfortunately, when you're in the middle of this situation, tensions were high and information was limited. Some people believed that this plague was a punishment from God, and people took this belief into their own hands and began killing people that they thought to be sinful to help end the plague early by removing the sinful from this world. The psyche of the general population was at an all-time low. When you wake up every day to bodies being carried in front of your house, being brought to burn piles, seeing people covered in awful lumps all over their body, and having a third of your family pass away overnight, you simply can't maintain a normal mind. As a doctor and hired professional, you do your best, but even for you, it's not easy. You finish your day, getting home late, making yourself a meal and resting, as you have another busy day tomorrow, doing all the same things over and over again, hoping that the number of deaths doesn't increase too much, and hoping that you didn't get infected yourself. This same cycle continues over the next years and years until signs of hope start to glimmer, with so many people dying that it's simply harder for the disease to spread. With increased quarantine measures and increased awareness about hygiene in the mind of the population, it appears that the disease is starting to lift and potentially things are starting to look better. You may be out of the job, but you're completely happy about that because your job requires hell and you'd rather be retired in heaven than employed in hell. The government relieves you from your duties and you go back to your home in the countryside, finally reconnecting with your wife and children after years of no contact, because even sending a letter could potentially spread the disease as bad air could be trapped in the envelope. You arrive in the countryside to a wife who's breaking down at the sight of you and kids who barely recognize you. You all share a pleasant moment and then go inside. Your wife prepares you a beautiful meal for your return, and your children just want to know who you are and where their dad has been. You have the best day that you've ever had in your life, and you feel that maybe this endless nightmare is over. You tuck your young children into bed for the first time in years, and before going to bed yourself, you go to the washroom. And by washroom, I mean you step outside to take a leak. You unzip your pants and urinate into the vegetable garden you didn't realize your wife planted there. You give yourself a few shakes and realize something on your leg. It's a small lump on your inner groin. It's unfortunately something you're familiar with, and now the timer is ticking.